Hello, story enthusiasts. Welcome to Pika Fiction. We're thrilled to share with you what if Ash caught a mythical Meloetta who used her voice to make every girl obsessed with him enjoying the ride. Hit subscribe and join our growing community of story lovers. Your support fuels our creativity. And now, the story awaits. Chapter 1, The Songbird and the Storm. The ferry cut through water so blue it looked fake. Ash leaned on the bow railing with his forearms crossed, salt wind pulling at the brim of his cap. Pikachu sat on the railing beside him, ears twitching at the approaching landmass that rose from the ocean in layers of green jungle and white cliff face. The Crescendo Archipelago. He'd heard stories, a chain of islands where music was woven into everything, where wild Pokémon sang in harmonies that could make grown men weep, where the strongest trainers in 6 regions gathered once every 3 years for an invitational that made the Silver Conference look like a schoolyard scuffle. He'd earned his invitation the hard way. 6 regional circuits. A top 4 finish in the Masters 8. Enough battle experience to fill a library and enough scars to prove it wasn't all trophies and handshakes. Pika. Pikachu's nose twitched toward the island. Yeah, buddy. I smell it too. Not a literal smell. Something electric in the air. A hum beneath the sound of the waves, almost like the island itself was vibrating at a frequency just below hearing. It made the hair on his arms stand up. The ferry horn blasted twice, and Port Cadence materialized around a rocky headland, a crescent harbor lined with colorful buildings stacked up the hillside, fishing boats and racing yachts bobbing side by side. A massive amphitheater dominated the eastern cliff, carved directly into the stone, its tiered seating overlooking both the ocean and a battlefield that gleamed with fresh paint. A boy of 16 might have pressed against the railing with wide eyes. Ash was 20 now, and he'd seen enough harbors. But the corner of his mouth pulled up all the same. Let's go make some noise. Port Cadence hit him with a wall of sound the moment he stepped off the gangplank. Street musicians on every corner, a girl with an altaria whose voice wove between the Pokémon's cloud song, a weathered old man playing something stringed while his cricketun bowed alongside him. Market stalls shouted prices. Windgulls screamed overhead. The entire town operated at a volume that would have given Professor Oak a migraine. Ash loved it immediately. He shouldered his pack and moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone used to navigating unfamiliar cities. Pikachu rode his shoulder, tail occasionally flicking against the back of his neck as a signal, look left, interesting smell, potential threat, never mind it's just food. The Pokémon Center sat at the top of the harbor road, white walls with the signature red roof, but this one had musical notes carved into the stonework above the entrance. He pushed through the doors and joined the registration line for the Crescendo Invitational. The trainer ahead of him was arguing with the clerk about seating. Ash waited, patient, scanning the lobby. Battle screens showed highlights from previous tournaments. He recognized a few faces. Lance dismantling someone's team with his Dragonite. Cynthia's Garchomp moving like black lightning. A trainer he didn't know, silver-haired and sharp-jawed, commanding a Toxtricity with terrifying precision. Next. Ash stepped up. The clerk was a young woman, maybe his age, with short blue hair and wire-rimmed glasses. She glanced up, did a visible double-take, and nearly knocked over her coffee. "You're Ash Ketchum. That's what it says on my trainer card." He slid it across the counter with a smile. Her fingers brushed his as she took it. She held the contact a beat too long, then seemed to realize what she was doing and snatched the card away, color flooding her cheeks. "Right. Yes. Sorry. Registration. Let me just," she fumbled with the computer. "You're in Block C. First match is tomorrow at 2. Your room assignment is, take your time." She looked up at him again. Her pupils were slightly dilated. "Has anyone ever told you that you have really, She trailed off, shook her head sharply, and printed his badge with shaking hands. Room 214. Good luck. Not that you need it. I've seen your battles. All of them. That's not weird, right? That's research. That's dedication, Ash said, and the girl made a sound like a tea kettle reaching boil. He clipped the badge to his jacket and walked away. Behind him, Pikachu glanced back at the clerk, who was fanning herself with a tournament pamphlet, then looked at Ash with an expression that could only be described as suspicious. What? Pika Pika. She was just being friendly. Pikachu's flat stare could have stripped paint. He didn't go to his room. The room could wait. The island couldn't. Ash took the switchback trail that climbed from the north end of town into the highland forest, because he'd learned years ago that the best way to understand a new place was to see it from above. The trail was well maintained for the first mile, then rougher, then barely a suggestion between fern banks and moss-covered boulders. The canopy closed overhead, filtering the afternoon sun into green-gold shafts. Wild Pokemon watched from the underbrush, Chatot that echoed his footsteps, Chimecho that rang softly as he passed, a Whizmore that squeaked and rolled behind a log. Everything here was sound. Even the bugs seemed to chirp in key. Then he heard it. Not a Pokemon cry. Not a bird call. Something else entirely, a melody so pure it didn't seem to travel through the air so much as exist in it, the way light exists in a room. No source. No direction. Just suddenly, everywhere, a voice without words singing something that made his chest ache in a way he couldn't name. Ash stopped walking. Pikachu's ears stood straight up, rigid, trembling. You hear that? Chew. Pikachu whispered it. Even he didn't want to break the spell. The melody shifted, rose, twisted, became something urgent. Frightened. And underneath it, a sound that didn't belong, a mechanical whine, like capacitors charging. Ash ran. He crashed through the undergrowth without pretense of stealth, vaulting a fallen log, dodging a low branch that grabbed at his cap. The music grew louder and more desperate. He burst through a curtain of hanging vines into a clearing ringed by ancient trees, and saw her. She was small, maybe 2 feet tall, hovering 3 feet off the ground on legs that tapered into flowing shapes like the hem of a dress. Green hair streamed behind her like a banner. Her eyes were enormous, cerulean blue, and right now they were wide with terror. Meloetta. He knew her on sight. Not from a textbook. From a feeling, that same electric hum he'd sensed on the ferry, amplified 1,000-fold, resonating in his bones. She was surrounded. For trainers in matte black tactical gear formed a semicircle, each commanding a Pokemon position to cut off escape routes. An Exploud anchored the center, its pipe organ body thrumming with subsonic waves that visibly distorted the air. Flanking it, a Noivern with some kind of antenna array bolted to its head emitted targeted pulses of sound that made Meloetta flinch and drop altitude every time they hit. On the far sides, a Toxicroak and a Bisharp waited with the patient stillness of closers. The operatives wore earpieces and moved with military coordination. The one in front, a woman with a shaved head and a scar running from her temple to her jaw, spoke into a comm unit without looking away from Meloetta. Target contained. Aria suppression at 70%. Moving to capture. Meloetta sang a desperate note and tried to dart upward. The Noivern's antenna pulsed. She screamed, actually screamed, a sound that hit Ash like a physical blow, and tumbled, catching herself inches from the ground. The woman pulled a device from her belt. Cylindrical. Gunmetal gray. It hummed with a sound that was the opposite of music, a null tone, a frequency designed to eat harmony. She pointed it at Meloetta. Hold still, little thing. This will only, Pikachu. Thunderbolt. The antenna. Ash's voice was flat. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just certain. Pikachu launched from his shoulder like a yellow comet. The bolt hit the Noivern's antenna array dead center, and the device exploded in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The Noivern shrieked and reeled backward, suddenly deaf to its own echolocation. Every operative spun toward the tree lean. Ash walked out of the shadows with his hands in his jacket pockets and his cap pulled low. Pikachu landed in front of him, cheeks sparking. The scarred woman's eyes narrowed. Civilian. Walk away. This is a sanctioned operation. Sanctioned by who? That's classified. Ash looked past her at Meloetta. The little Pokemon was staring at him, her enormous eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that went beyond curiosity. She'd stopped trembling. Here's what's not classified, Ash said. You've got a cornered mythical Pokemon, military hardware, and 4-on-1 odds, and she's still fighting you. That tells me she doesn't want to go with you. So I'm going to give you the same choice she didn't get. He pulled a Pokeball from his belt and expanded it with a click that echoed through the clearing. Walk away. The woman studied him. Something shifted behind her eyes, recognition. You're Ketchum. I'm the guy telling you to leave. A moment of calculation. Then, explode. Hyper voice. Sweep the field. The explode opened its massive mouth, and the world became sound. Ash was already moving. He'd clocked the explode's position the moment he entered the clearing, noted the slight forward lean that telegraphed a wide area attack. He threw himself sideways, rolling behind a boulder as the hyper voice shredded the air where he'd been standing. Trees cracked. Leaves vaporized. The sound hit like a hurricane. Pikachu, agility into Iron Tail, the explode's left speaker port. Pikachu blurred. The explode was powerful but slow to redirect, and Pikachu knew how to exploit that gap between attacks. His iron-hardened tail cracked into the exposed speaker port on the explode's flank, not a knockout blow, but it disrupted the resonance. The hyper voice stuttered and died, replaced by a feedback whine that made the explode stagger. The scarred woman barked orders. Toxicroak, intercept. Bisharp, flank. 2-on-1. Against Pikachu, those were bad odds, for them. Ash pulled a second ball. Sceptile, let's go. The forest Pokemon materialized in a crouch, tail blade gleaming, golden eyes already scanning for targets. Ash didn't need to explain the situation. Sceptile read the battlefield the way a musician reads sheet music, one glance and he was moving. Sceptile, take the Toxicroak. Leaf Blade, keep it at range, it'll try to close for poison jab. Don't let it. Sceptile launched forward with the explosive speed that had shocked a Darkrai once upon a time. The Toxicroak came in fast, frog legs pumping, poison purple fists leading. Sceptile's Leaf Blade met the first poison jab with a crack that scattered light, deflected it, and the follow-through caught the Toxicroak across the chest and sent it spinning into a tree. Pikachu handled the Bisharp with the casual disrespect of a veteran who'd fought legends. The Bisharp was fast and precise, bladed arms cutting geometric patterns in the air, but Pikachu had fought Pokemon that moved between dimensions. He ducked a Night Slash, jumped a Metal Claw, and planted a close-range Thunderbolt directly into the Bisharp's steel face. The Bisharp hit the ground smoking. The Noivern, still reeling from its destroyed antenna, tried a desperate air slash. Ash didn't even call for it, Pikachu redirected mid-landing and blasted the Noivern out of the air with a contemptuous flick of electricity. 3 down in under a minute. The explode remained, but it was rattled, one speaker blown, its trainer, the scarred woman, clenching her jaw as she recalculated. Ash didn't give her time to finish the math. Sceptile. Leaf Storm. The attack hit the explode like a green tornado. The massive Pokemon bellowed once and toppled, crashing through underbrush, and didn't get up. Silence fell. Real silence, not the manufactured kind. Just the settling of dust and the soft ticking of cooling electronics. The scarred woman looked at her fallen team. Looked at Ash. Looked at Pikachu and Sceptile, neither of whom was breathing hard. She pressed her calm, target engagement failed. Hostile trainer on site. Ketchum class. Requesting extraction. She recalled her team without another word. Her operatives did the same, melting into the tree line with practiced efficiency. In 30 seconds, the clearing was empty except for Ash, his Pokémon, and Meloetta. Ash exhaled. The adrenaline buzz faded, replaced by a warm stillness. He recalled Sceptile with a quiet, "Nice work," and turned to face the mythical Pokémon. Meloetta was watching him. Not scared. Not wary. Fascinated. She drifted closer, head tilted, those enormous eyes searching his face like she was reading a language only she could understand. She reached out one small hand and touched his cheek. Ash felt it, a resonance, like a tuning fork struck inside his chest. A warmth that spread outward from the point of contact, not physical heat but something deeper. Emotional. Like she was listening to the song his heart made and finding it, good. "Hey," he said softly. "You okay?" She hummed. Not a melody this time, just a single sustained note that vibrated in the space between them. Her fingers traced down to the pokeball still in his hand. "I'm not going to catch you," Ash said. "You're free. You can go wherever." Meloetta pressed her palm against the pokeball's button. The ball opened. Red light engulfed her. She didn't resist, didn't even tense. She flowed into it like water into a cup, and the ball clicked shut with a soft chime. 1 shake. 2. 3. Ding. Ash stared at the ball in his hand. Pikachu stared at it too. She just. "Pika. Did she just catch me?" Pikachu shrugged with his entire body. This was new territory for both of them. Ash released her immediately. She materialized with a pirouette, twirling in the air, and the melody returned, different now, lighter, playful. She orbited his head once, twice, then settled on his other shoulder, opposite Pikachu. She weighed almost nothing. She smelled like rain on wildflowers. Pikachu leaned forward and looked past Ash's chin at the new arrival. Meloetta leaned forward and looked past Ash's chin at Pikachu. They regarded each other for a long moment. Then Meloetta sang a 3-note phrase, and Pikachu's ears relaxed completely. "Guess that settles it," Ash said. He reached up and scratched behind Meloetta's ear. She made a sound like a purring violin. Something had changed. He could feel it, a new thread in the fabric of his awareness, the way he could always feel Pikachu's mood at the edge of his consciousness. But this was different. Warmer. Musical. Like carrying a song in your head that you couldn't quite identify but that made everything feel more vivid. The walk back to town felt different. Colors looked saturated. The air tasted sweeter. Every sound had an undertone of harmony, as if the world itself had been slightly retuned. He didn't question it. Probably should have. The Pokémon Center lobby was crowded with tournament arrivals when Ash walked in. Trainers clustered around the battle screens, compared notes, sized each other up with the particular intensity of people who traveled a long way to prove something. Ash kept Meloetta in her ball. A mythical Pokémon floating around his head in a public space was a good way to start a riot, and made his way toward the cafeteria. He didn't make it. "Ash Ketchum, you absolute," the voice hit him before the person did, but only by a fraction of a second. He turned just in time to catch 120 pounds of orange-haired fury that slammed into him hard enough to make him stagger. "Misty." She had him in a hug that was closer to a wrestling hold, arms locked around his neck, face buried in his shoulder. She was taller than he remembered, or maybe he was remembering her at 12, which wasn't fair to either of them. Her hair was longer now, pulled back in a loose tail, and she wore a cropped blue jacket over her gym leader's swimsuit that somehow looked both casual and like she could throw you into the ocean at a moment's notice. 3 years, she said into his jacket. 3 years since Cerulean, and you couldn't pick up a phone. I called on your birthday. That was a text, Ash. A text with a Pikachu emoji is not a phone call. It was a really good emoji. She pulled back. Her eyes were the color of the ocean outside the harbor, and they were doing something he didn't have a word for, searching his face with an intensity that went past annoyance and into territory he genuinely didn't know how to map. Her hands stayed on his shoulders. She didn't seem to be in a hurry to remove them. "You look." She stopped. Blinked. Tilted her head slightly, as if hearing something far away. "Different." "Good different." Don't fish for compliments. But her cheeks were pink, and her grip on his shoulders tightened instead of releasing. "You're taller. And your shoulders are wider." She said this like it was personally offensive. "Training will do that. Stop talking." She hugged him again, softer this time, and Ash felt a strange pulse at the edge of his awareness, a warmth that wasn't his own, bleeding through from somewhere. He glanced down at the pokeball on his belt. It was vibrating faintly. Meloetta was humming inside it. "Oh my gosh, ASH." He looked up. Dawn was crossing the lobby at a speed that suggested she'd either been running or had spontaneously developed quick attack. She was radiant, dark blue hair bouncing, pink scarf trailing, beaming a smile that could power a small city. She'd grown up too. They all had. Dawn arrived at his other side and, without hesitation, hooked her arm through his free one. Misty's eyes snapped to the point of contact like a targeting laser. "When did you get here?" "I just docked an hour ago." "Are you in the tournament too?" "Of course you are, silly question." "Have you seen the amphitheater?" "It's gorgeous." Dawn was pressed against his arm, and she seemed perfectly content to stay there. Her head tilted against his shoulder. You smell nice. Like pine trees and electricity." "Is that weird to say?" "Little bit," Ash managed. "I don't care. I'm saying it." Misty's arm was still around his shoulders on the other side. The two girls became aware of each other at the same time, the way opposing magnetic fields become aware of each other, a tension in the air, a subtle shift in posture, smiles that stayed in place but hardened at the edges. "Misty." "Hi." "Wow, it's been forever." "Dawn." "Hey. You're on his arm." "Am I?" "Oh, look at that." "So are you." The temperature in the lobby dropped approximately 10 degrees. Pikachu, with the survival instincts of a Pokémon who'd literally fought gods, climbed to the top of Ash's head and tried to make himself as small as possible. "Why don't we all get dinner?" Ash said, because food had solved approximately 60% of his life's problems. "The cafeteria smells amazing." Both girls turned their smiles on him. The smiles were warm and genuine and made his stomach do something he attributed to hunger. "Great idea," they said in unison. Then they looked at each other. The temperature dropped another 5 degrees. Ash walked to dinner with a girl on each arm and a mounting sense that something fundamental about his reality had shifted. Pikachu rode his head like a lookout in a crow's nest, scanning for threats. He found several. The cafeteria was a long hall with open windows overlooking the harbor, and the food was extraordinary, island dishes heavy with tropical fruit and fresh-caught seafood, the kind of cooking that made you forget every meal you'd ever eaten before. Ash loaded 2 plates because he was Ash and because apparently some things about him would never change. He grabbed a corner table. Misty sat to his left. Dawn sat to his right. This arrangement happened naturally, without discussion, and with the sort of territorial precision usually reserved for predators establishing a kill zone. They talked. It was easy, old stories, new accomplishments. Misty had expanded the Cerulean Gym into one of Kanto's premier facilities. Dawn had swept the Sinnoh Grand Festival for the second time. They were impressive people, both of them, and Ash felt genuinely proud listening to them, which he told them, because he'd never been good at keeping things like that to himself. Misty looked away and tucked her hair behind her ear. Dawn pressed closer and said, "You're sweet," in a voice that was a full octave lower than her usual register. Something was off. Ash couldn't pinpoint it. These were his friends. They'd always been warm, always been close. But there was an edge to it now, a charge, like the air before a thunderstorm. Every accidental touch lingered. Every laugh came with eye contact that held a beat too long. Pikachu sat on the table between Ash's two plates, eating ketchup and watching the situation with the grim focus of a field commander monitoring an escalating conflict. On Ash's belt, invisible, Meloetta hummed. The hum was barely audible. A whisper of melody that blended with the ambient noise of the cafeteria, the clink of dishes, the chatter of trainers, the distant cry of sea birds. Nobody could have consciously heard it. But every girl in the cafeteria had turned to look at Ash at least once in the last 10 minutes. The ones sitting nearest had angled their chairs slightly in his direction, like flowers tracking the sun. A waitress had refilled his water glass 4 times without being asked and once when it was already full. Ash didn't notice any of this. He was telling a story about the time his Greninja had outmaneuvered a Mega Charizard. Misty noticed. Her eyes tracked each glance from the surrounding tables, catalogued each lingering look, and her hand moved to rest on Ash's forearm with the casual possessiveness of a Gyarados circling its territory. Dawn noticed too. She scooted her chair close enough that her knee pressed against his under the table, and she leaned her chin on her palm with her face turned toward him at an angle that just happened to present her best profile to the room. They weren't even doing it consciously. Not fully. The aria, Meloetta's ambient song, leaking from her pokeball in microdoses, didn't manufacture feelings. It found them where they already lived, buried under years of politeness and distance and the particular cowardice that comes from loving someone who seems perpetually unaware that love is even an option. It found those feelings, dusted them off, and removed the locks. What was left was pure want with all the fear stripped away. The dinner continued. More old friends arrived. Stories were told. But the undercurrent flowed and strengthened, and Meloetta hummed, and the evening tilted towards something none of them had language for yet. The sun was setting when Ash escaped to the hallway outside his room on the 2nd floor. Escaped was the right word. Misty and Dawn had both found reasons to walk him upstairs, and the silent competition over who would say goodbye last had escalated to the point where he'd literally shut his door while they were still standing in the hall mid-sentence. He leaned against the door and exhaled. Pika. Pikachu was giving him a look. What? Pikachu. They're not acting weird. They're just happy to see me. Pikachu facepalmed. An actual facepalm, tiny yellow paw against his own forehead, the gesture of a creature who had endured years of this and was rapidly approaching the end of his patience. Ash pushed off the door and moved to the window at the end of the hall. Port Caden sprawled below, the harbor lights winking on as dusk settled. He pulled Meloetta's ball from his belt and released her inside the quiet hallway. She materialized with a soft chime and immediately floated up to eye level, studying his face with that searching expression she'd worn in the forest. Her hair drifted like seaweed in a gentle current. "Hey," Ash said. "We haven't really gotten to talk." "Well, I talk, you sing. We'll figure it out." He leaned against the windowsill. "Those people in the forest. The ones who had you. Do you know who they were?" Meloetta's expression clouded. She sang a low, minor key phrase, 3 notes that conveyed danger, pursuit, time more clearly than words could have. "They've been chasing you for a while." A nod. "Do you know why?" She touched her own throat. Then she sang a single, crystalline note, and the window glass vibrated in its frame. Not dangerously. Just enough to show that her voice was something more than sound. "Because of your song." Another nod. Her eyes were ancient and sad and knowing, and for a moment Ash understood that this small creature had existed for longer than human civilization and had been running for most of it. Hunted for a voice she couldn't stop using, because singing was how she breathed. "I won't let them take you," he said. Not a promise, a statement of fact, delivered with the same flat certainty he'd used in the clearing. "You chose me. That means something." Meloetta's eyes shimmered. She floated forward and pressed her forehead against his, and the resonance hit him again, that tuning fork vibration in his chest, the sense of two frequencies aligning. He could feel her gratitude, her loneliness, her joy at finally having someone to sing for. It was overwhelming and beautiful, and it made his eyes sting. "Yeah," he whispered. "Me too." When she pulled back, she was smiling. It transformed her entire face, ancient sadness replaced by something young and mischievous and full of light. She began to hum again, softer than before, and this time Ash felt it consciously, a warmth spreading outward from him like ripples in a pond. It was gentle. Comforting. The kind of feeling you'd want to share with everyone you cared about. He had no idea what it was doing to every woman within 200 yards. 2 more arrivals the next morning. Because of course. May showed up with the sunrise, stepping off a boat from Hoenn with her blaziken at her side and a bandana in her hair and a smile that could melt glaciers. She found Ash at breakfast, screamed his name across the cafeteria, and crossed the room in approximately 3 steps to throw her arms around him. "You got so big," she said, her hands on his shoulders, mapping changes. "Look at you. When did you get all this?" She gestured vaguely at his entire upper body. "Somewhere between Kalos and Alola. Lots of running. I'll say." She sat across from him and stole a piece of fruit off his plate with the ease of someone who traveled with him long enough to know that his food was communal property. "I heard about the Masters 8. Top 4. I was watching the broadcast and I was screaming, Ash, literally screaming. My neighbors called the police." "Sorry about your neighbors. Don't be. They were horrible." She kicked his foot under the table and left hers resting against his. "I missed you." 2 words. Simple. But she said them in a way that was different from any way she'd said them before, direct, unguarded, with a softness behind her eyes that made Ash's brain do a weird stuttering thing, like a computer encountering an unexpected file type. "I missed you too, May." She bit her lower lip and looked down at her plate and then up at him through her lashes, and Ash had the sudden disorienting sensation that he was in a conversation he didn't fully understand. Misty appeared, saw May's foot against Ash's, and sat down next to him with the force of a judge delivering a verdict. Dawn appeared, saw the configuration, and sat on his other side. The table became a war room. 20 minutes later, Serena walked through the cafeteria doors. She'd changed the most. Still the honey blonde hair, still the blue eyes, still the ribbon she wore like a secret. But she moved differently now, with the poise of someone who performed on stages across Hoenn and Galar, who'd won showcases and modeled and turned her kindness into a career. She was beautiful in a way that made people look twice, and she knew it, and she wore it lightly. She saw Ash and stopped. For a long moment, she just stood in the doorway and looked at him. No scream. No rush across the room. She just looked, and something passed across her face, 1,000 words compressed into a single expression. Recognition. Memory. A girl standing on a runway waving goodbye, hoping he'd turn around. He hadn't turned around. She'd forgiven him for it, but she'd never forgotten. Then she walked to him. Calm. Measured. She stood at the end of the table and waited until he looked up. Hi, Ash. Serena. She leaned down and kissed him on the cheek. Not on the corner of his mouth like last time. Full cheek, deliberate, lingering. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright and steady and absolutely certain of something. Save me a seat at your matches, she said. Then she sat down at the table as if she'd been there all along. The other 3 girls stared at her. Then at each other. Then at Ash, who was touching his cheek with the expression of a man who'd just been struck by a very warm, very confusing lightning bolt. Pikachu started eating faster. In his experience, things were about to get complicated, and he wanted to finish his ketchup while the table was still in one piece. On Ash's belt, hidden, Meloetta sang. The tournament's opening rounds began that afternoon under a sky so blue it looked painted. The amphitheater was packed, thousands of spectators filling the carved stone seats, banners snapping in the ocean wind, the smell of grilled food and anticipation thick in the air. Ash's first match was against a trainer from Gaylor named Callum, who had a regional championship under his belt and a Corviknight that was reportedly undefeated. He was tall, composed, and projected the kind of quiet confidence that came from never having been seriously challenged. That was about to change. The battlefield was regulation, dirt and stone, no environmental features, no gimmicks. Just two trainers, their Pokémon, and 60,000 years of competitive evolution. Ash walked out to his box. The crowd noise swelled. He heard his name from at least 4 different sections of the stands, which shouldn't have been notable except that every time he glanced up, it was a cluster of female fans waving homemade signs with his name written in hearts. He hadn't had female fans with heart signs before. This was new. In the stands, Misty, Dawn, May, and Serena sat in a row. The seating arrangement had been negotiated with the intensity of a peace accord. Serena sat at one end, serene. Misty sat at the other end, coiled like a spring. May and Dawn occupied the middle, maintaining a fragile neutrality. Meloetta was out of her ball, invisible to most eyes, hovering just behind Ash's head. She wasn't invisible in the literal sense, she'd simply positioned herself at an angle where the crowd couldn't get a clear look, appearing as a greenish blur that people's eyes slid over without registering. She'd done this for centuries. She was good at it. She was also singing. Not loudly. Not a specific melody. Just a low, continuous hum, a carrier wave of emotional resonance that rolled outward from Ash like heat from a bonfire. The 4 girls in the stands felt it most acutely because they were already attuned to him, their existing feelings acting as amplifiers. But everyone in the amphitheater felt something. A heightened awareness. A sense of importance. The feeling that they were about to watch something extraordinary. Callum's Corviknight hit the field first, massive, steel-feathered, radiating authority. Ash threw his ball without fanfare. Charizard. The dragon materialized with a roar that shook the amphitheater. He was enormous, larger than a standard Charizard by a full head, battle-scarred, his flame burning white-hot at the tip. He'd been with Ash through hell and back. Literally, in the case of the Ultra Beast incident. Callum's confidence flickered. Just a fraction. Just enough. Corviknight, Steel Wing. Charizard. Wait. The Corviknight came in fast, a missile of black steel, wings gleaming. Charizard didn't move. He stood at the center of the field, flame crackling, eyes fixed on his opponent with the patient menace of something that could afford to let you get close. The Corviknight closed the distance. 20 meters. 10. 5. Now. Flare blitzed through the steel wing. Charizard ignited. It wasn't a dodge. It wasn't a counter. It was a denial. Charizard wreathed himself in fire so intense the air warped and drove straight through the Corviknight's attack, absorbing the steel wing's impact with his own blazing body and converting the momentum into a collision that sent the Corviknight spiraling into the battlefield wall hard enough to crack stone. The crowd erupted. Callum recalled his Corviknight and sent out a grim snarl. Ash recalled Charizard and sent out Lucario. The grim snarl tried bulk up into Spirit Break, smart, textbook, well executed. Lucario dismantled it in 3 moves, Detect on the Spirit Break, Aura Sphere at point-blank range on the recovery, and a close combat finisher that left the grim snarl embedded in the ground. The third and final matchup was Callum's Dragapult against Ash's Pikachu, and this was where it stopped being a battle and became a statement. Dragapult was fast. Legitimately, terrifyingly fast, a Phantom Jet Pokémon that existed as much in the ghost dimension as the physical one, firing dreepy missiles and phasing through attacks. It was the kind of Pokémon that made other trainers throw up their hands and forfeit. Pikachu looked at it like an old friend. Quick attack into Iron Tail, feint high, hit low. Pikachu moved. The Dragapult tracked him, launched a dragon darts, and Pikachu vanished. Not literally. Just faster than the Dragapult's targeting. He reappeared below its guard, iron tail glowing, and cracked it across the jaw. The Dragapult tried to phase. Pikachu was already there, waiting in the space it phased into, with a thunderbolt charged and a look in his eyes that said, "I've been doing this since before you were hatched." One hit. The Dragapult materialized fully, paralyzed, and dropped. Match. Set. Done. The amphitheater lost its collective mind. Ash walked back to the tunnel with Pikachu on his shoulder, and the roar followed him like a wave. He glanced up at the stands. All four of them were on their feet. Misty was screaming something he couldn't hear over the crowd but could read on her lips. "That's MY, she stopped herself." Her mouth closed. Her cheeks went red. She sat down abruptly. May was clapping with both hands over her head, bouncing on her toes, eyes shining. Dawn had her phone out and was recording, narrating into it. "Did you see that? Did you see what he's incredible, he's absolutely." She stopped, realized she was recording a video that sounded more like a love letter, and stuffed the phone in her pocket. Serena wasn't screaming or recording. She was just watching him with a small smile, chin in her hand, and when his eyes found hers, she held his gaze and mouthed 2 words. "I knew." Ash's chest did the thing again. The warm lightning thing. He pulled his cap down and kept walking. Behind him, invisible, Meloetta spun in a delighted circle and sang a trill of pure joy that cascaded across the amphitheater like confetti. In the stands, 14 women who'd never met Ash Ketchum suddenly felt a powerful and inexplicable urge to find out his room number. Evening settled over Port Cadence like a warm blanket. The ocean turned gold, then copper, then deep violet. Street musicians shifted to slower tempos. The town exhaled. Someone had organized a dinner on the beach, tournament trainers and their friends, long tables set up on the sand with lanterns swinging from poles. Ash went because he was hungry and because turning down food was physically impossible for him. All 4 girls came. This was inevitable. What was less inevitable was how they arranged themselves around him with the precision of a military formation, creating a perimeter that no other female could breach without encountering at least one hostile glare. The dinner was good. The company was overwhelming. Misty sat close enough that her bare shoulder touched his arm, and every time it did, she tensed slightly and then deliberately didn't move away, as if she was daring herself. She talked about her gym, about the water Pokemon migration she'd been tracking, about the new Gyarados she'd raised from a Magikarp that was bigger than her first one. She was brilliant and passionate, and when she laughed at something Ash said, she leaned into him, and her hair smelled like salt water and vanilla. Dawn was on his other side, and she'd apparently made friends with a local musician because she kept humming fragments of a melody under her breath and scribbling lyrics on a napkin. "This place is inspiring," she said, her eyes bright. "The music here, Ash, it's like nothing I've ever heard. I want to incorporate it into my contest performances. Maybe a whole musical showcase. Can you imagine?" She grabbed his hand to emphasize a point and then didn't let go. She seemed as surprised by this as he was, but she committed to it with the determination that defined everything Dawn did. May had somehow ended up in charge of the dessert course and kept bringing Ash things, fruit tarts, chocolate-covered berries, something local called a melody cake that was frankly divine. Each delivery came with a touch, a hand on his shoulder, fingers brushing his, once a whole body lean across the table that brought her face inches from his. "You need to eat more," she said, which was objectively insane given his plates. Serena sat across from him, quieter than the others, but her gaze was the heaviest. She nursed a drink and watched him with those steady blue eyes, and every so often she'd say something, a callback to their time in Kalos, a question about his journey, a dry observation that made him laugh, and each word was precisely placed, like a performer who knew exactly which notes to hit. It was wonderful and terrifying. Ash felt like a man standing in 4 spotlights simultaneously, each one warm and bright and coming from a different direction, and if he turned toward any one of them, the others would notice. Pikachu had retreated to a safe distance and was sharing a bowl of berries with a local Mario, watching the disaster unfold with the world-weary expression of a veteran who'd seen too many wars. Then Meloetta emerged. Ash had let her out of her ball to enjoy the evening, and she'd been floating quietly among the lanterns, invisible to casual observation. But as the sun finished its descent and the sky turned to stars, she drifted down to the waterline, hovering just above the gentle surf, and began to sing. Not humming. Not fragments. The full song. It started low, barely distinguishable from the wash of waves. A single note, sustained, pure as glass. Then it grew, layers building on layers, harmonies weaving through harmonies, a melody that seemed to contain every beautiful sound that had ever existed. The crash of surf. The whisper of wind. The creak of ancient trees. The laughter of children. Rain on warm stone. A heartbeat. Conversation on the beach died. Every head turned toward the water. Trainers who'd been mid-sentence trailed off. Pokémon went still. Even the waves seemed to soften, as if the ocean itself was listening. The song was not in any human language, but everyone who heard it understood it perfectly. It was about connection, the invisible threads between living things, the warmth of being known, the terror of being alone. It was about finding someone whose frequency matched yours in a universe of static. It was the most beautiful thing any of them had ever heard, and several people were crying without knowing when they'd started. Ash stood at the edge of the water, watching his Meloetta sing, and felt something vast and luminous open up inside his chest. The resonance was stronger than ever, a harmonic convergence between his heart and her voice that amplified everything, reflected everything, broadcast everything. Behind him, something changed in the four girls who'd loved him in silence for years. Misty felt it first, a sudden, terrifying clarity, as if someone had ripped away a curtain she'd been hiding behind since she was 12 years old. The feelings she'd packed into a box and shoved to the back of her heart came flooding forward, vivid and undeniable. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Dawn felt it like inspiration, a rush of creative fire, the same feeling she got at the peak of a perfect performance, but aimed squarely at the boy standing at the water's edge. Her half-written lyrics suddenly completed themselves in her mind, and every word was about him. May felt it as warmth, a deep, nourishing warmth that radiated from her center, the overwhelming urge to take care of him, feed him, hold him, make sure he was never cold or lonely or hurt. It was maternal and romantic and desperate and so intense she had to grip the table to stay in her chair. Serena felt it like confirmation. Not a revelation, a validation. The calm, absolute certainty that she'd been right all along. That the ribbon on her chest and the years of waiting and the kiss at the airport hadn't been foolish or naive. They'd been true. She stood up. The song ended. Meloetta's last note hung in the air like a star, trembling, then faded. The beach was silent for a full 5 seconds before anyone breathed. Ash turned around. 4 pairs of eyes hit him like searchlights. He knew, in that moment, that something was wrong. Not wrong in the sense of danger, wrong in the sense that the world had shifted on its axis and he was the only one who hadn't been given the memo. These were his friends. He knew their faces better than his own. But the way they were looking at him now was not how friends look at friends. It was how the ocean looks at the shore. "I'm going to take a walk," he said, and his voice sounded distant in his own ears. Night sounds filled port cadence, distant laughter, the clink of glasses, the eternal wash of waves. Somewhere, a cricketune was playing a melody so sweet it could break your heart. Ash stood on the balcony of the Pokémon Center, 2nd floor, leaning on the railing. Pikachu was asleep in the room behind him, curled up on the pillow. Meloetta was in her ball, also resting. He was alone with the night and his thoughts were a mess. There's a specific kind of panic that comes from realizing that the people you care about most in the world are all acting differently around you, and you don't know why, and you're starting to suspect it might be your fault. Ash was deep in that panic. Couldn't sleep either. He turned. Misty stood in the doorway to the balcony, barefoot, in a loose shirt and shorts that she slept in. Her hair was down. He'd almost never seen her with her hair down. It changed her face, made it softer, younger, more like the girl who'd fished him out of a river a lifetime ago. "Just thinking," he said. She walked to the railing and stood beside him. Not touching, but close. Close enough that he could feel the warmth of her skin in the cool night air. "About what?" "About today. You guys. Some things." He struggled for words. Articulating emotion had never been his strongest skill. Different. Misty was quiet for a long time. She stared out at the harbor, at the lights on the water, at the silhouette of the amphitheater against the stars. "Ash. Yeah. I'm going to say something, and I need you to just listen. Can you do that?" He nodded. She gripped the railing. Her knuckles went white. "I've been thinking about you since the day I left. Not constantly. Not like some obsessed little kid. But you're always there, you know. This background hum. I go on dates, and I compare them to you, and they come up short because none of them ever looked at a charging Garridos and grinned. None of them made me feel like the world was this huge, amazing adventure that I was lucky to be part of." She swallowed. "I told myself it was nostalgia. That I was remembering a version of you that didn't exist anymore. But then I saw you today, and Ash, you're exactly the same, except you're also completely different, and she turned to face him. Her eyes were bright. Not with tears, with something fiercer. "I'm scared of how I feel about you. I've always been scared. But right now, tonight, I don't want to be scared anymore. I don't know why. I just know I'm done pretending I don't feel this." Ash opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His brain was processing her words at approximately the speed of a slowpoke encountering advanced calculus. "Misty," I said, "listen. You also said you were done talking." "I wasn't done." You paused. It was a dramatic pause. "I'm building to something." "Sorry." "Continue." She glared at him. Then she laughed, a broken, helpless laugh that sounded like it had been trapped inside her for years. "God. You haven't changed at all." She punched his shoulder. It was the gentlest punch she'd ever thrown. Her fist stayed against his arm. She stared at it, surprised by her own tenderness. The balcony door opened again. Dawn stepped out, also in sleep clothes, also barefoot, also with her hair down. She stopped when she saw Misty. "Oh. Am I? Come out," Ash said, because what else was he going to say? Dawn walked to the railing on his other side. She looked at Misty. Misty looked at her. Something passed between them, not hostility. Recognition. "You too." "I was coming to tell you something," Dawn said quietly. "But I think Misty might have beat me to it." "I didn't tell him anything," Misty said quickly. "I was making observations. Emotional observations. Tactical observations." "Right." They both looked at Ash. He looked at the ocean. The balcony door opened a third time. Serena. She took in the scene with a single glance. Misty on his left. Dawn on his right. Ash in the middle looking like a man who'd just been told the world was ending and also that he was the cause. Serena walked forward, not to the railing but directly to Ash, and stood in front of him. "They're telling you how they feel," she said. Not a question. "I think so. I'll save you the speech." She looked him dead in the eyes. "I love you, Ash. I've loved you since you took my hand in a forest when we were kids. I have never stopped. I never will. You need to know that, and you needed to know it a long time ago. That's all." She said it without trembling. Without hedging. Without the defensive armor that Misty used or the bubbly deflection that Dawn employed. Just clean, clear, absolute truth, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd practiced it in mirrors for years and no longer needed the mirror. Ash felt the ground shift under his feet. Not literally. But something inside him, something dense and oblivious and carefully maintained, cracked. Because here's the thing about Ash Ketchum, he wasn't stupid. He wasn't even oblivious in the way people thought he was. He was selective. He chose not to see these things because seeing them meant making choices, and making choices meant potentially losing people, and he'd rather have everyone close and undefined than anyone close and complicated. But standing on that balcony with 3 women he genuinely cared about, each one peeling back layers of honesty he'd never expected, the selective blindness failed. He saw. He felt. And it was overwhelming and terrifying and warm, and he had no idea what to do with any of it. He ran a hand through his hair. His cap was on the nightstand inside. Without it, he felt exposed. This is a lot. We know, Dawn said softly. I don't want to hurt any of you. I don't know how to, you don't have to know right now, Misty said. And her voice was gentle, actually gentle, which alarmed him more than any of the confessions. We're just done hiding it. All of us, apparently. They stood there, 4 people on a balcony, the sea whispering below, and for one suspended moment the world was perfectly still and painfully beautiful. Then Ash felt it. Not from the girls. Not from the night. From his belt, Meloetta's ball, humming urgently, a vibration that escalated from gentle to frantic in the space of a heartbeat. He pulled it free, confused, and before he could release her, the ball burst open on its own. Meloetta materialized in midair, spinning, agitated, singing sharp staccato notes of alarm. Mel. What's, she pointed toward the harbor. Her eyes were wide. Terrified. The same look she'd had in the forest. Ash looked. At first, nothing. The harbor lights, the boats, the dark water. Then, movement. Shapes on the water, black against black, sliding around the headland with their running lights extinguished. Ships. Not 1 or 2. A fleet, fanning out across the harbor mouth in a formation designed for one purpose, containment. The first explosion was almost gentle, a soft whomp from the northern dock, followed by a column of white fire that lit the harbor like a flare. Then another. And another. Concussive charges, placed along the waterfront, detonating in sequence, each one sending shockwaves that rattled windows across town. The street lights died. The music died. The sound of the cricketune cut off mid-note. In the sudden darkness, a new sound emerged, a low, pervasive hum, mechanical and vast, rolling across the water like fog. It was the opposite of Meloetta's song. Where her voice created connection and warmth, this sound created nothing. An absence. A void where harmony should be. It pressed against Ash's eardrums like fingers trying to pry them shut. A sound-dampening field. Industrial scale. Meloetta screamed. She clutched her throat, her voice breaking, the sharp notes of alarm dissolving into static. She dropped a foot in the air, then 2, wobbling, her glow flickering. Ash caught her. Scooped her out of the air and held her against his chest, and she clung to him, trembling, her song reduced to a whisper. A loudspeaker crackled from the lead ship. The voice that came through was calm. Cultured. The kind of voice that had practiced being reasonable until reasonableness became a weapon. Port cadence. This is Maestro Cale Vitor of the Silencio Initiative. We are here for one thing and one thing only. Surrender the Meloetta, and no one else needs to be hurt. You have 30 minutes. The loudspeaker clicked off. The dampening hum continued, pressing down on the town like a hand over a mouth. Ash looked at Meloetta in his arms. She looked up at him, eyes streaming, voiceless, terrified. He looked at the three girls on the balcony, Misty's face hard with fury, Dawn's eyes wide with shock, Serena's expression already shifting to calculation. He looked at the dark harbor and the fleet of black ships. His jaw set. Something old and familiar and iron-hard locked into place behind his eyes, the same thing that had locked into place before every impossible battle he'd ever fought, before every legendary he'd ever faced, before every moment when the world asked him to back down and he chose the other thing. He put on his hat. Like hell, he said. Misty was already reaching for her pokeballs. Dawn grabbed hers, eyes blazing. Serena stepped to his side, one hand on her belt, the other briefly touching his arm. From the room behind them, the sound of Pikachu waking up, not groggy, but alert, cheeks already sparking, because Pikachu always knew. Pikachu always knew. Somewhere in the Pokémon Center below, Ash heard May's voice, loud, outraged, unmistakable. What was that? Is everyone okay? Where is Ash? On the black ship at the harbor center, a man in a white coat stood at the bow, hands clasped behind his back, a photograph in his breast pocket over his heart. Kale Vitor watched the lights go out across Port Cadence and felt nothing. He'd turned his grief into purpose and his purpose into steel, and tonight he would silence the song that should never have been sung. On the balcony, Ash held Meloetta against his chest and looked at the people around him, friends, rivals, something more, and made the only choice he'd ever known how to make. Forward. Let's go. Chapter 2, Discord and Desire. Ash hit the ground floor of the Pokémon Center at a dead sprint with Pikachu on his shoulder and Meloetta tucked against his chest like something precious and breakable. The lobby was chaos, trainers stumbling out of rooms in various states of undress, Nurse Joy shouting instructions over the emergency intercom, the backup generators kicking in with a reluctant groan that bathed everything in sickly yellow light. Misty, Dawn, and Serena were right behind him. May intercepted them at the stairwell, Blaziken already out and flanking her, its wrist flames casting sharp shadows across the walls. 3 ships, May said, falling into step without missing a beat. I counted from my window. Maybe more behind the headland. They're deploying something along the waterfront, metal towers, about 10 feet tall. That's where the hum is coming from. Sound dampeners, Ash said. They're the same tech from the forest, just bigger. They're trying to suppress Meloetta's voice. Then we break them. He looked at May. She looked back at him with the calm ferocity of a coordinator who'd learned to fight in wild contests across 3 regions, and he remembered why he'd always trusted her in a crisis. No hesitation. No drama. Just what needs to happen next. They burst through the Pokémon Center's front doors into the street. Port Cadence was waking up to a nightmare. The harbor was lit in stuttering flashes, concussive charges still detonating along the northern docks, pillars of white fire reflecting off the black water. The dampening hum was louder out here, a subsonic pressure that made Ash's teeth ache. He could feel Meloetta shaking against him, her song reduced to a faint tremor, like a bird with a hand around its throat. Zodiacs were hitting the beach. Black rubber boats carrying Silencio operatives in tactical gear, each one accompanied by a Pokémon, Loud Red, Noibat, Exploud, anything with sound-based abilities repurposed for suppression. They moved with military precision, spreading out along the waterfront in pairs, establishing a perimeter. They're not here to fight, Serena said, her voice sharp with analysis. They're here to contain. Seal the exits, tighten the net, force a surrender. Then we don't let them seal anything. Ash set Meloetta down gently on a bench behind a stone planter, cover, concealment, out of the line of fire. She clung to his hand, eyes huge and pleading. Stay here. Stay hidden. I'll come back for you. She shook her head frantically. Mel, listen to me. That hum is hurting you. The farther you are from the fighting, the safer you'll be. I need you to trust me. She stared at him. Then, slowly, she released his hand and pressed herself into the shadow of the planter. Her glow dimmed to almost nothing. She was still shaking, but she nodded. Ash turned to face the harbor. 5 of his closest friends stood behind him, pokeballs in hand, waiting for him to say the word. He didn't plan it. Didn't strategize it. The battlefield was the harbor, the enemy was already deploying, and the objective was simple: break the dampeners, push them back, protect Meloetta. Everything else was improvisation. Misty, take the north dock. Water advantage, use the harbor. Flood their landing zone if you can. Misty's eyes lit up. With pleasure. She was already running, Starmie's ball in her hand. Dawn, south dock. Same principle. Slow their advance, keep them bottled up at the waterline. Dawn cracked her knuckles. On it. She took off with Piplup materializing at her side, the little penguin puffing up with an intensity that belied its size. May, you're with me. We're going straight down the middle. Those dampening towers are the priority. Blaziken and Charizard, we burn them. May's smile was sharp. Now you're speaking my language. Serena, I know. She was already turning toward the Pokémon Center. Coordinate the other trainers. Get Nurse Joy's emergency system running. Set up a fallback point. He hadn't even finished the thought. She'd read it off his face. Be careful, she said, and it wasn't a plea. It was a command. Always am. You have literally never been careful in your life. Then don't start worrying now. He grinned, and she shook her head, and something passed between them, a frequency, a warmth, a thing without a name, and then she was gone, running back inside with Braixen's ball already in her hand. Ash faced the harbor. Pikachu leaped from his shoulder to the ground, cheeks sparking, electricity arcing between the cobblestones. Let's go break some stuff. Pika. The battle for Port Cadence lasted 47 minutes, and it was the most chaotically beautiful thing any of them had ever been part of. Misty hit the north dock like a tidal wave, literally. Gyarados erupted from the harbor water with a roar that drowned out the dampening hum, and a hydro pump swept the first wave of Silencio operatives off the dock and into the sea. Their loud red tried to counter with hyper voice, but Starmie was already in position, spinning a rapid spin that deflected the sound waves back at their source. The loud red staggered, deafened by its own attack, and Gyarados finished it with a contemptuous flick of its tail. Misty fought like the sea itself, relentless, adaptive, finding every gap in their formation and pouring force through it. She'd learned things since Cerulean. Hard things. Her Pokémon moved with a synchronization that spoke of thousands of hours of training, and her voice cutting through the chaos was ice clear and absolute. An operative's Noivern came at her from above. She didn't even look up. Gyarados. Ice Fawn. The dragon caught the bat out of the air and crunched. Frozen wings hit the dock. Fight over. On the south dock, Dawn was doing something that shouldn't have been possible, turning a contest performance into a combat strategy. Piplup's bubble beam wasn't just an attack, it was a screen, a wall of shimmering bubbles that refracted light and obscured targeting. Behind that screen, her Mamoswine charged like a freight train, scattering operatives and their Pokémon with the sheer panic of 10 tons of mammoth bearing down on you at full speed. And behind that, Togekiss flew air support, raining aura spheres on any operative who tried to flank. Dawn directed it like a symphony. Each Pokémon had its movement, its timing, its cue. She called switches mid-beat, rotated her lineup, created combinations that no military strategist would have anticipated because they weren't military tactics, they were performance art weaponized. A Toxicroak tried to close in and caught a bubble beam ice beam combo that froze it mid-leap in a sculpture of iridescent ice. Dawn blew a kiss at it as she ran past. Down the center, Ash and May went straight for the dampening towers. There were 6 of them spaced along the main harbor road, 10-foot metal spires with dish-shaped emitters at their peaks, each one guarded by a pair of operatives. The hum they generated was oppressive this close, a physical weight on the eardrums, a wrongness in the air that made Pokémon flinch and trainers stumble. Charizard melted the first tower with a flamethrower that turned the metal cherry red before it buckled and collapsed. The operatives Exploud tried to intervene. Blaziken closed the distance in one leap and drove a blaze kick into its chest that sent it through a market stall. 2 down, May called, Blaziken already pivoting to the next target. 4 to go. Ash pointed. Pikachu, the emitter dish, fry the electronics. Pikachu launched a precision thunderbolt that arced through the night and hit the second tower's dish dead center. Sparks erupted. The hum from that section of the harbor cut out like a sliced wire. They leapfrogged down the road, taking turns, Charizard on one tower, Blaziken on the next, Pikachu darting between to disable anything electronic. The operatives fought back, but they weren't prepared for this. They'd expected a sleeping town and a quick extraction. They got Ash Ketchum and 4 women who'd been battling since childhood. The 5th tower was more heavily guarded. 3 operatives, an Exploud, and something new, a Pokemon Ash didn't recognize at first. Squat, mechanical, with speakers built into its body and a single lens eye that tracked targets with unsettling precision. It projected a focused dampening beam that hit Pikachu mid-charge and sent him tumbling, his electricity sputtering. Pikachu. Ash scooped him up. Pikachu was shaking, sparks flickering erratically. The dampening beam had disrupted his electrical generation. Temporary, probably, but in the middle of a fight, temporary could be fatal. I've got this one. May stepped forward. Blaziken flanked her, and she pulled a second ball. Glacian, Spotlight. The ice-type materialized with crystalline grace, exhaling frost. May was in contest mode now, not just fighting but performing, every command flowing into the next with a rhythm that turned combat into choreography. Glacian, Ice Shard Screen. Blaziken, through the gap, high jump kick. Glacian sprayed a wall of ice shards that forced the mechanical Pokemon to redirect its beam. In the fraction of a second the beam wasn't tracking them, Blaziken exploded through the ice screen, shards sparkling around it like stage effects, and drove a knee into the machine Pokemon with enough force to launch it into the harbor. You're showing off, Ash said. You love it. May flipped her hair. Blaziken incinerated the tower. The 6th and final tower was at the harbor's edge, closest to the Silencio ships. The hum here was strongest, the master emitter, Ash realized, the one feeding power to the rest of the network. Taking it out would drop the entire dampening field. But the lead ship had repositioned. Its deck-mounted sound cannons, massive parabolic dishes designed for wide-area suppression, swiveled toward the waterfront. The scarred woman from the forest stood on the bow, directing fire. All units, focus on the center. They're going for the primary emitter. Sound cannons, full spread. The cannons fired. It wasn't sound. It was the weaponization of sound, focused sonic beams that hit the waterfront like invisible hammers, cracking cobblestones, shattering windows, sending Ash and May staggering. Charizard roared in pain, his sensitive inner ear overwhelmed. Blaziken dropped to one knee. We need to take out those cannons. Ash shouted over the roar. I can't reach them from here. We need water coverage. Misty. The shout carried across the harbor, somehow cutting through the sonic barrage. Whether Misty heard his voice or simply felt the shift in the battle's flow, she responded. Gyarados erupted from the harbor directly beneath the lead ship, jaws clamped on the hull, and pulled. The ship listed violently. Cannons that had been aimed at the waterfront swung skyward, firing uselessly into the clouds. Now. Ash and May hit the primary emitter together. Charizard and Blaziken, side by side, fire and fire, a combined flamethrower blaze kick that turned the master tower into a column of white heat. The metal didn't just melt, it evaporated. The dampening hum collapsed. All of it. Across the entire harbor, the oppressive silence lifted like a fog bank burning off in the sun. And from the bench behind the stone planter, 6 blocks away, Meloetta's voice returned. She didn't ease back into it. She erupted. A burst of song that rolled across Port Cadence like a shockwave of pure harmony, hitting every operative, every soldier, every hostile Pokemon in range. The song didn't damage them. It did something worse, it made them feel. Every suppressed doubt about their mission, every buried guilt about hunting a creature whose only crime was singing, every sliver of empathy they'd packed away under orders and ideology, it all surged to the surface at once. Operatives dropped their equipment. Pokemon stopped fighting. The scarred woman on the listing ship pressed her hands over her ears, not in pain but in the desperate attempt to block out a song that was showing her things about herself she didn't want to see. Ash stood in the wreckage of the dampening field, breathing hard, Pikachu sparking weakly in his arms, and watched the Silencio fleet pull back. The black ships retreated around the headland like shadows fleeing daylight. Quiet settled. Real quiet, not the manufactured silence of the dampeners, but the natural quiet of a town catching its breath after a storm. May leaned against Blaziken, panting. That was. She laughed breathlessly. That was incredible. From the north dock, Misty recalled her Gyarados and pumped her fist in the air. From the south dock, Dawn was actually taking a bow while Piplup preened beside her. And somewhere behind him, Serena was directing the cleanup, the evacuation, the medical response, having turned the Pokemon Center into a functioning command post in under 20 minutes. Ash looked down at Pikachu. "You okay, buddy?" "Chew." Pikachu managed a weak thumbs up. "Yeah. Me too." He carried Pikachu back to the bench where he'd left Meloetta. She flew into his chest the moment she saw him, arms around his neck, singing a fragmented melody of relief and joy that made his eyes sting. "Told you I'd come back." She buried her face in his shoulder and sang something that sounded a lot like home. Dawn broke the sun over a wrecked harbor. Port Cadence looked like someone had taken a beautiful painting and punched holes in it. 3 docks were damaged. A dozen market stalls were demolished. The amphitheater had taken glancing damage from a stray sonic blast that had cracked 2 tiers of seating. Fishing boats listed at odd angles. The smell of smoke and saltwater and spent electricity hung in the air. But nobody was dead. Nobody was seriously hurt. The dampening field hadn't been lethal, just oppressive, and Silencio's operatives had been more interested in containment than killing. Whatever Kale Vitor was, he wasn't a murderer. Ash filed that away. It mattered. Nurse Joy ran a triage station in the Pokemon Center courtyard, treating trainers and Pokemon side by side. The local police chief, a stocky woman named Officer Riff, had taken statements from everyone involved and was currently on a video call with the Pokemon League that seemed to consist primarily of her shouting at people. Ash sat on the Pokemon Center steps with a mug of coffee he hadn't drunk and a 1,000-yard stare he couldn't shake. Meloetta was in her ball, resting. Pikachu was in the treatment center getting his electrical system stabilized. The girls had scattered to help with the cleanup. For the first time since last night, he was alone. "Young man." The voice came from his left. Ash turned and found an old woman standing beside him, ancient, easily 80, with a spine like a steel rod and eyes that were milky at the edges but sharp at the center. She wore robes of deep green embroidered with musical notation, and she leaned on a staff carved from driftwood that had tiny chimcho bells embedded in its head. "I'm Cadenza," she said. "I tend the island's history. And you have brought something to my shores that I need to speak with you about. If this is about the damage, it's about the Meloetta." She sat down beside him without asking, the way old people do when they've decided that courtesy is a luxury they've outlived. "I heard her sing last night. On the beach. Not the battle song, the real song. The aria." Ash looked at her sharply. "You know what it is?" "I know what it does, which is more than you know." She pulled something from her robe, a tablet of carved stone, small enough to fit in her palm, etched with symbols that Ash couldn't read. "The aria of resonance. The song without lies. It was forbidden on this archipelago 400 years ago." "Forbidden?" "A Meloetta lived here once. Long before the tournament, before the port, when these islands were still wild. She sang the aria freely, and for a time, it was paradise. People loved openly. Feuds ended. Bonds formed that were deeper than anything mortals typically achieve. Cadenza's eyes went distant. Then the wars started. Ash's coffee went cold in his hands. Wars. Not because the psalm was evil. Because humans couldn't handle what it gave them. The aria doesn't create feelings, boy. It reveals them. Strips away every defense, every lie, every comfortable illusion. What's left is truth, and truth without armor is the most dangerous force in the world. She turned the stone tablet in her fingers. People who'd been rivals discovered they loved each other and fought over it. Communities fractured along lines of desire no one had acknowledged. 3 islands went to war because 2 chieftains loved the same woman, and the aria made it impossible for any of them to pretend otherwise. The coffee mug trembled slightly in Ash's grip. And the Meloetta? She didn't understand. She was singing because it was her nature. She didn't know she was setting the world on fire. Cadenza looked at him. Sound familiar? It did. It sounded exactly like the small, frightened creature who'd pressed her palm against his pokeball in a forest clearing and chosen him because his heart sounded like safety. The girls, Ash said slowly. My friends. What's happening to them, is real. Every feeling they've shown you, every confession, every moment of intensity, those emotions are genuine. They were there before the aria. They'd have been there without it. But they'd also have stayed buried, possibly forever. Humans are remarkably talented at hiding from their own hearts. Cadenza put the stone tablet away. The aria just opened the doors. Whether that's a gift or a curse depends on what you do next. Ash stared at the harbor. A windgull landed on a listing boat and pecked at something. Can I ask Meloetta to stop singing? Cadenza's expression shifted. Something sorrowful crossed her features. You can ask. She would try, for you. But singing is how she exists. It's not a choice, it's breathing. Asking her not to sing is asking her to suffocate. He'd known. Even before asking, he'd known. Is there a way to control it? Focus it? There are techniques. I can teach some of them. But, boy, she gripped his wrist with surprising strength. The aria isn't your biggest problem. Listen to me carefully. 400 years ago, the Meloetta who lived here didn't just sing for joy. She sang to maintain a seal. There is something beneath these islands, something old, something that feeds on the opposite of everything Meloetta represents. Discord. Isolation. The severing of bonds. As long as a Meloetta sings, it sleeps. But your Meloetta was silenced last night, even briefly, and I felt, she stopped. For the first time, fear crossed her weathered face. I felt it stir. A chill ran through Ash's body that had nothing to do with the morning air. What is it? We call it cacophon. And if it wakes fully, the aria won't just be a love song anymore. It'll be the only weapon we have. She stood, planted her staff, and looked down at him with the particular sternness of someone who's lived long enough to know exactly how bad things can get. Keep your Meloetta singing. Keep her safe. And figure out your heart, Ash Ketchum, because before this is over, the strength of your bonds may be the only thing standing between this archipelago and annihilation. She walked away. The chime-cho bells on her staff chimed softly with each step, and the sound lingered long after she disappeared around a corner. Ash sat on the steps and did something he almost never did. He thought. He found Meloetta that afternoon in the Pokemon Center's garden, a small courtyard with flowering trees and a fountain where recovering Pokemon came to rest. She was sitting on the fountain's edge, trailing her fingers through the water, not singing. Just quiet. When she saw him, her eyes brightened, but there was something guarded behind the brightness. She knew something was coming. Ash sat beside her. The fountain burbled between them. Mel, he said. I need to talk to you about the aria. She flinched. Small, barely visible, but he caught it. She pulled her hand from the water and folded both hands in her lap, looking down. An old woman named Cadenza told me about it. What it does. How it affects people. He paused. Is she right? Does your song open up people's feelings? Meloetta was still for a long moment. Then she nodded. A single, tiny nod. Did you know it was doing that to my friends? Another pause. Longer. Then, not a nod, not a shake. A complex gesture, hands moving in a way that conveyed partially, not entirely, it's complicated. She sang a soft phrase, minor key, apologetic, layered with nuance his ears couldn't fully decode but his heart understood. I knew the song reached them. I didn't know it would be so strong. You make it stronger. Your heart amplifies everything. I've never felt anything like you before. My heart amplifies it. She placed her hand on his chest, over his heart, and sang a single note. He felt it, the resonance, the vibration, the harmonic convergence between her frequency and his. It was like two tuning forks touching. The note she produced alone was beautiful. The note his heart reflected back was a chord, rich and full, and it radiated outward with 10 times the power. She wasn't just singing near him. She was singing through him. His emotional clarity, the same quality that let him bond with every Pokemon he'd ever caught, the same openness that made Pikachu choose him, that made legendaries trust him, was acting as an amplifier for the aria. So as long as you're with me, the song is going to be. She nodded. She looked miserable. And you can't stop singing. She shook her head. Her eyes were filling. Hey. He reached out and lifted her chin. I'm not going to release you. I'm not going to ask you to stop being yourself. We'll figure this out. She blinked. The tears fell but her expression shifted, surprise, then something deeper. She'd been expecting rejection. She'd been expecting to be sent away, the way she'd been sent away before, in other centuries, by other people who couldn't handle what she was. Instead, Ash was sitting beside her on a fountain, telling her they'd figure it out, with the same matter-of-fact certainty he'd used to discuss a battle strategy. She launched herself at him. Arms around his neck, face in his shoulder, singing a melody so full of gratitude and relief that the fountain water began to glow faintly and the flowers in the garden turned toward them like tiny satellite dishes. Ash held her and rubbed her back and tried very hard not to think about the fact that his heart was currently broadcasting that warmth to every emotionally attuned woman within a quarter mile. In the Pokemon Center lobby, the registration clerk dropped her coffee for the second time in 2 days and had no idea why. The afternoon brought complications. The first was political. Officer Riff intercepted Ash outside the treatment center where he'd gone to check on Pikachu and informed him, with the diplomatic delicacy of a sledgehammer, that the Crescendo Island Council had convened an emergency session and his presence was required. Required or requested? Ash asked. Required, Riff said. They're debating whether to demand you release the Meloetta for the safety of the archipelago. The attack last night has people scared, Ketchum. They're looking for someone to blame. They could blame the people who attacked us. They could. But those people left. You're still here. Politics. Ash hated politics. He'd rather fight another fleet. The council chamber was in the old town hall, a circular room with tiered seating carved from island stone and acoustic panels that made every whisper audible. 7 council members sat in a semicircle at the front. The gallery was packed with townspeople, trainers, and, Ash noted with a tightening in his chest, all 4 of his friends, seated in the front row with expressions ranging from furious, misty, to analytical, serena. The council chair was a thin man named Fortissimo, which was ironic given his personality. He spoke in measured pianissimo, and every word was calibrated to project authority without raising his voice. Mr. Ketchum. Thank you for attending. We'll be brief. He wasn't going to be brief. Last night's attack on Port Cadence was the direct result of your possession of a mythical Pokemon that a paramilitary organization is actively pursuing. The damage to our infrastructure, while reparable, represents a significant threat to the safety of our citizens and the viability of our tournament. The damage to your infrastructure, Ash said, was caused by Silencio, not by me. My Pokemon and my friends defended this town while your security forces were still putting on their shoes. A murmur ran through the gallery. Fortissimos, I twitched. Be that as it may, the root cause is a man named Kale Vitor who believes he has the right to hunt and silence mythical Pokemon. If you want to address the root cause, help me stop him. If you want to blame the person who fought to protect your town, I'm going to need a better reason than he was standing nearby when bad things happened. Mr. Ketchum, he's right. The new voice came from the gallery entrance. Every head turned. She walked in like she owned the room, which, in any room she entered, was essentially true. Tall, blonde, dressed in black and gray, with a presence that compressed the air around her into something denser. Cynthia, champion of Sin-No, regarded the council with the serene authority of someone who'd stared down gods and found them wanting. Champion Cynthia, Fortissimo managed. We weren't informed, the Pokemon League dispatched me this morning when we received reports of the attack. I've been in contact with Champion Lance and the Inter-Regional Security Council. She walked to the front of the room and stood beside Ash, which was either a strategic positioning choice or something else entirely. Mr. Ketchum's capture of the Meloetta is legally sound. The Pokemon chose him willingly. Demanding its release would violate 7 league statutes and 2 international treaties. More practically, it would leave an extraordinarily powerful mythical Pokemon unprotected against a well-funded paramilitary group. She turned to face the council fully. The league's recommendation is to increase security for the tournament, coordinate with Mr. Ketchum on Meloetta's protection, and pursue formal action against the Silencio initiative. Not to punish the trainer who defended your shores. Fortissimo opened his mouth. Cynthia raised one eyebrow. It was the smallest possible gesture, and it shut him down completely. The council will take the league's recommendation under advisement, he said, in the voice of a man who'd just been advised to jump and was asking how high. The session dissolved. Trainers and townspeople filed out, murmuring. Ash exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Thanks, he said to Cynthia. She looked at him sidelong. Up close, she was even more striking than he remembered, cheekbones that could cut glass, gray eyes that processed everything at a speed most people couldn't follow. But there was something else there now, something he hadn't seen before. A crack in the composure. A warmth behind the analysis. You've grown up, she said. People keep telling me that. Because it's true. She studied him with an intensity that went beyond professional assessment. You handled the council well. Direct. No wasted words. That's new. I've had practice. With councils. With people telling me I'm the problem when I'm not. The corner of her mouth twitched. Walk with me. I need a detailed briefing on the Silencio engagement, and I'd rather not do it in a room full of politicians. They walked. Through the old town, past the damaged waterfront, up a hillside path that overlooked the harbor. Cynthia asked sharp, precise questions about the attack, force composition, technology, tactics, Kale's demands. Ash answered them the same way. It was a professional conversation between 2 experienced trainers. Except for the moments when it wasn't. Cynthia's hand brushed his twice on the narrow path. The second time, she didn't pull it away immediately. She asked about his team composition and then, in the same breath, asked if he was eating enough, and seemed startled by the question as soon as it left her mouth. Sorry, she said. That was, off topic. I eat plenty. May's been bringing me food non-stop. Ah. Something flickered across Cynthia's face. May is here. And Misty. And Dawn. And Serena. All of them. Cynthia's expression was carefully, deliberately neutral. That's quite a reunion. Ash recognized the neutrality. He'd seen it on battle opponents who were concealing their strategy. It was the face of someone working very hard not to show what they were thinking. He didn't press it. He was learning, slowly, painfully, that sometimes the most important thing happening in a conversation was the thing no one was saying. They reached the overlook. The harbor spread below them, crews already working on repairs. Cynthia stood at the edge, wind pulling at her hair, and for a moment she was just a person looking at the sea. Ash. Yeah. Be careful with the Meloetta. I've studied the aria of resonance. The historical records are troubling. She paused, and he could almost see her choosing between the professional version and the personal one. It amplifies genuine emotion. Strips away inhibition. Makes people act on feelings they'd normally suppress. Another pause. I've been around you for 20 minutes, and I can already feel it working. She said it clinically, like reporting a symptom. But her hand gripped the overlook railing hard enough to whiten her knuckles. You can feel it. A pull. Toward you. Not manufactured, I can tell the difference. It's more like. She searched for words, and Cynthia searching for words was a rare and unsettling sight. Like someone turned up the volume on something that was already playing quietly. She looked at him. The composure cracked, just for a second. What was behind it was raw and complicated and very human, and it made Ash's chest tighten in a way he was becoming uncomfortably familiar with. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know, she said, resealing the crack with visible effort. And because if I don't say it now, I'll say it later in a way that's less controlled. She straightened. Champion mode, back in place, the vulnerability filed away behind gray eyes and impeccable posture. I'll be staying for the duration. League orders. We should coordinate on the Silencio threat. Cynthia, that's all for now. She walked past him, back toward town, and her fingers brushed his sleeve as she went. Intentional or not, he couldn't tell. He stood on the overlook alone, staring at the sea, and thought, this is getting out of hand. On his belt, Meloetta's ball vibrated with a tiny, satisfied hum. The second complication arrived that afternoon in the form of a fist. Ash was crossing the main plaza, heading back to the Pokémon Center to check on Pikachu, when a voice cut through the crowd like a blade. Catch him. He turned. A young man his age stood in the center of the plaza, arms crossed, silver hair catching the sun. Sharp jaw. Sharp eyes. A Toxtricity stood beside him, purple and yellow, fingers resting on its chest protrusions like a guitarist about to strike a chord. Ash recognized him from the tournament highlight reels. The trainer he hadn't been able to identify. Damian Cross, the young man said. Crescendo Archipelago champion. And I've been waiting to say this since you got here. Say what? That you're a danger to this island, and your Meloetta needs to be released. The plaza quieted. Trainers stopped walking. Shopkeepers leaned out of doorways. In a town that ran on music, a public challenge hit different. It had the weight of a performance, the expectation of an audience. Ash studied Damian Cross. Not angry, controlled. Not arrogant exactly, certain. There was a difference. Arrogant people bluffed. Certain people had done the math and didn't need to. You were at the council meeting, Ash said. I was. And unlike those politicians, I'm not going to hide behind procedure. Mythical Pokémon aren't pets, catch 'em. They're forces of nature. Your Meloetta's song is already destabilizing the emotional equilibrium of every person in this town, and the paramilitary fleet that just attacked us is proof that you can't protect her and these people at the same time. I just did both. Last night. Last night was a skirmish. What happens when they come back with more ships? More tech? What happens when the Arya drives someone to do something they can't take back? Damien's jaw tightened. I've seen what uncontrolled mythical power does. My grandmother's village was destroyed by a rampaging legendary. She spent her life rebuilding. I won't let that happen here. Ash felt the ground shift, not the physical ground, but the moral ground. Because Damien wasn't wrong. Not entirely. The Arya was affecting people. The fleet would come back. And Ash was at the center of it. The difference was in what you did with that truth. I hear you, Ash said. And I respect it. But Meloetta chose me. I'm not going to abandon her because protecting her is hard. Damien's eyes narrowed. Then prove you're worth the trouble. Battle me. Full 6-on-6, tournament rules. If I win, you consider releasing the Meloetta to the island's protection. If you win, I back off. I don't need to prove anything to you. No. But you need to prove it to them. Damien swept a hand at the crowd. Trainers, townspeople, people who'd been attacked last night because of a Pokemon Ash was carrying. These are my people. They deserve to see what kind of trainer is asking them to take this risk. Ash looked at the crowd. Looked at the faces, curious, anxious, uncertain. They didn't know him. They'd seen his tournament battle, heard about the harbor fight, but he was still a stranger with a mythical Pokemon and a fleet of enemies. Damien was theirs. Sometimes the right thing to do wasn't the tactically smart thing. Sometimes it was the human thing. Fine, Ash said. Full 6-on-6. Right here, right now. Damien blinked. He'd expected negotiation. Conditions. Instead, he got Ash Ketchum pulling a pokeball from his belt with the ease of a man reaching for a glass of water. Right now. In the plaza. You wanted a statement. Let's make one. The crowd formed a ring. Word spread fast in a town this size. Within minutes, the plaza was packed, spectators lining the balconies of surrounding buildings. Ash saw his friends pushing to the front, Misty with her arms crossed and a look that said destroy him, Dawn bouncing on her toes, May clutching Serena's arm, Serena watching with focused calm. Cynthia stood at the back of the crowd, leaning against a column, arms crossed. Watching. Damien threw first. Toxtricity. Let's go. The punk rock Pokemon stepped forward, fingers finding its chest protrusions, and let loose a cord that rattled windows. It was a statement, I am sound. I am this island. You're the outsider. Ash smiled. It was the smile of someone who'd been the outsider in every region he'd ever visited and had won them all. Lucario. The aura Pokemon materialized in a combat stance, paws glowing blue, eyes locked on the Toxtricity with predatory focus. Toxtricity, overdrive. The attack came fast, an amplified electric wave that tore across the plaza, leaving scorch marks on the cobblestones. Lucario didn't dodge. He redirected, catching the electric energy with an aura sphere and spinning it away like a fastball, sending it harmlessly into the sky. Damien's eyes widened fractionally. Close combat, Ash said. Lucario blurred forward. The Toxtricity tried to counter with poison jab, too slow. Lucario's first hit buckled its guard, the second drove it backward, the third was a palm strike to the solar plexus that lifted the Toxtricity off its feet and deposited it on its back, unconscious. One move. The crowd erupted. Damien recalled his Toxtricity without changing expression. He was recalculating. Good. Ash wanted him to recalculate. The next matchup was Damien's Noivern, not a Silencio model, no tech attached, just a pure, beautifully trained dragon bat, against Ash's Gengar. The Noivern was fast and aggressive, using echolocation to track Gengar even when the ghost-type phased in and out of visibility. It landed a dragon pulse that sent Gengar tumbling, followed by a boom burst that cracked the plaza fountain. Jengar came back grinning. Because Jengar always came back grinning. Shadow Ball. Into the boom burst. Jengar fired the shadow ball directly into the Noivern's next boom burst. The collision created a shockwave that blinded the Noivern's echolocation for a critical second. In that second, Jengar was behind it, point blank, and a sucker punch connected with devastating precision. The Noivern dropped. 2 down. Damien sent out a Kamo-O, Ash countered with Dragonite. This battle was longer, brutal, physical, 2 dragons trading blows that shook the ground. Kamo-O's clanging scales turned the plaza into a resonance chamber, the sound bouncing off buildings and hitting from multiple angles. Dragonite weathered it with multi-scale, then answered with a dragon rush that drove the Kamo-O through a market stall and into a wall. Kamo-O got up. Dragonite hit it again. It didn't get up the second time. 3-0. Damien's jaw was tight, but his eyes were alive, not with anger, with recognition. He was facing something he'd heard about but never experienced firsthand, a trainer whose bond with his Pokémon transcended strategy. Every command Ash gave was less an instruction and more a conversation, each Pokémon anticipating, adapting, fighting not just for victory but for him, with a devotion that couldn't be trained. Damien adjusted. His 4th Pokémon, a Grimmsnarl, gave Ash real trouble, taking out Dragonite with a devastating spirit break and forcing Ash to switch to Sceptile. The battle seesawed, Grimmsnarl's prankster ability disrupting Sceptile's rhythm until Ash called for a strategy shift that was pure instinct, Leaf Storm, aim at the ground. Sceptile fired into the cobblestones. Debris erupted, a cloud of dust and stone fragments that blinded the Grimmsnarl and nullified its visual tracking. Through the cloud, a leaf blade connected. Grimmsnarl fell. 4-1. Damien's 5th was a Flygon. Ash stayed with Sceptile, which was risky, Flygon had the type advantage. But Sceptile was fresh and fast, and Ash played it with surgical precision, Dragon Pulse dodged, Earthquake avoided by leaping onto the fountain's remains, and a point-blank leaf blade that caught the Flygon mid-turn. 5-1. Damien stared at his last Pokeball. The crowd was dead silent. This was no longer a battle, it was a demonstration. Obstagoon, Damien said quietly. Make it count. The blocking Pokémon materialized with a snarl, arms crossed, defiant. Its ability, Guts, meant it fought harder the more it was hurt. It was Damien's ace, and Ash could see why, the thing radiated pure, stubborn refusal to lose. Pikachu, Ash said. Every person in the crowd held their breath. Pikachu hopped off Ash's shoulder, cheeks sparking. He'd been resting since the harbor fight, his energy restored, and there was something in his stance, low, electric, eyes narrowed, that said he'd been waiting. Obstagoon, obstruct. The barrier went up, a wall of dark energy that blocked physical attacks and punished contact. Standard Obstagoon strategy, turtle up, counter, wait for an opening. Pikachu, don't touch it. Thunderbolt. The bolt hit the obstruct. It didn't break through, but it didn't need to. The electrical energy arced around the barrier, seeking ground, and the static charge built in the cobblestones beneath the Obstagoon's feet. Pikachu hit it again. And again. Each bolt missed the barrier intentionally, hitting the ground, the fountain, the metal lamppost, turning the entire plaza into a charged field. Damien saw it. Too late. Obstagoon, move, now. Every stored charge detonated at once. Lightning erupted from the ground, from the lamppost, from the fountain, converging on the Obstagoon from 6 directions. The obstruct blocked 1. It couldn't block 6. The Obstagoon staggered, dropped to one knee, and looked at Pikachu with something that might have been respect. Then it fell. Silence. Then the plaza exploded. The roar was deafening, trainers, townspeople, people hanging off balconies, all of them screaming. It wasn't just cheering. It was recognition. They'd watched a trainer earn the right to stand on their island, and he'd done it with style that would be talked about for years. Damien recalled his obstagoon and stood very still for a long moment. Then he walked across the plaza to Ash and extended his hand. "You're the real thing," he said. Simply. No flourish. Ash shook his hand. "So are you. That obstagoon's a monster. He'd have won if you hadn't turned the plaza into a circuit board." That was. Damien almost smiled. Annoying. And brilliant. I get that a lot. They held the handshake for a beat longer than necessary. Two competitors acknowledging each other. Not friends, not yet, but something adjacent. Respect, hard-earned and freely given. Damien leaned closer. His voice dropped below the crowd noise. "I still have concerns about the Meloetta. But I'll hold them for now. Don't make me regret it." "I won't." Damien turned and walked through the crowd, which parted for him with the deference of people who'd watched their champion lose with grace. Toxtricity fell into step beside him, and they disappeared down a side street, silver hair catching the last of the afternoon light. Ash stood in the ruined plaza, Pikachu on his shoulder, and felt a hand on his back. He turned. May was there, eyes shining. "That was incredible," she breathed, and she was standing very close, and her hand was moving from his back to his arm, fingers trailing. "Ash." Dawn appeared on his other side, practically vibrating. "The thing with the lightning, the plaza as a conductor, that was genius. I got the whole thing on video. The views are going to be, move." Misty shouldered through and stood directly in front of him, chin raised, eyes blazing. "You absolute show-off. You didn't have to style on him that hard. It felt right. It looked right." She said this like an accusation, but her cheeks were flushed and her eyes kept dropping to his mouth and bouncing away. Serena hung back. She caught his eye over the others' heads and gave him a small nod. "Well done, I'm proud, we'll talk later," all in a single look. Then she turned and began helping clear the battle damage from the plaza, because Serena was always doing the next useful thing. Cynthia had vanished from the back of the crowd, but Ash could have sworn he saw her smiling before she left. He was surrounded. Enveloped. The warmth of their attention was like standing in sunlight multiplied by 4, and he couldn't pretend he didn't feel it anymore. Couldn't pretend it was friendship. Couldn't pretend Meloetta's song was the only reason. Because Meloetta was in her ball. Had been the entire battle. And they were all still looking at him like he was the only real thing in the world. Night fell, and the complications multiplied. Ash couldn't sleep. He lay in his room at the Pokémon Center, staring at the ceiling, Pikachu curled at his feet, Meloetta's ball on the nightstand pulsing with a faint green glow. His brain wouldn't stop running the same loop. The feelings are real, the intensity is amplified, I can't turn off the amplification without hurting Meloetta, and I'm running out of reasons not to face this. A knock on his door at midnight. He considered ignoring it. He couldn't. It was May. She stood in the hallway in a loose t-shirt, holding a plate covered with a napkin. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. Her smile was small and real and slightly desperate. "I made you something," she said. "I know it's late. I was in the kitchen, and I couldn't stop cooking, and I kept thinking about how you used to eat everything I made even when it was terrible, and," she laughed. It cracked in the middle. "Can I come in?" He stepped aside. She set the plate on his desk. Underneath the napkin was a perfectly constructed sandwich, his favorite kind, the exact combination of ingredients that she somehow remembered from a journey they'd taken years ago across a different continent. "You remembered the pickles on the side," he said. "Of course I remembered the pickles on the side." She said this like it was the most obvious thing in the world, and then her face crumpled. Not into tears, into something more complicated. The expression of someone standing at the edge of a cliff they've been walking toward for years. "Ash, I know this is crazy. I know showing up at your room at midnight with a sandwich is certifiably insane behavior. But I I don't know what's happening to me. I've been thinking about you non-stop since I got here. Not just thinking, feeling. Like someone cranked up the dial on everything I've been carrying around quietly for years, and now it's so loud I can't ignore it, and I don't even want to ignore it anymore, and that scares me because I've always been the one who keeps things light and easy, and this isn't light and it isn't easy. She was crying now. And laughing. Simultaneously. It was the most May thing he'd ever seen. I made you a sandwich at midnight because I didn't know how else to say I care about you so much it physically hurts, and cooking is the only love language I know that doesn't require me to actually say the words. But I'm saying them now because apparently whatever is happening on this island has turned off my ability to shut up, so, I care about you. More than care. Way more than care. There. That's what the sandwich means. Ash looked at the sandwich. Looked at May. Looked at the sandwich again. It's a really good sandwich, he said. She threw a pillow at him. He caught it, laughing, and she was laughing too, and for a moment it was just them, two old friends who'd shared a road and a campfire and 100 small moments that had apparently been building toward this without either of them noticing. She wiped her eyes. I should go. Before Misty deploys some kind of radar system to track who's visiting your room. May. She stopped at the door. Thank you. For the sandwich. For being honest. She looked back at him, and her expression was open and vulnerable and brave, and she said, eat the whole thing or I'll be offended, and then she was gone. Ash sat on his bed and ate the sandwich. It was phenomenal. He had absolutely no idea what to do with his life. The next morning brought a visitor he wasn't expecting. He was walking the coastal path east of town, trying to clear his head, when he heard music, not Meloetta's music, but human music. Someone was playing an instrument with extraordinary skill, a complex melodic pattern that rose and fell like ocean waves, technically perfect but emotionally guarded. Professional. Practiced. The sound of someone who trained every ounce of feeling out of their performance and replaced it with precision. He rounded a bend and found a woman sitting on a rock overlooking the sea, playing a traditional string instrument he didn't recognize. She was his age, maybe a year older, dark skin, close-cropped curly hair, sharp features set in an expression of fierce concentration. She wore the Crescendo Archipelago's champion insignia on a cord around her neck. She stopped playing when she saw him. Her eyes, amber, striking, went immediately to the pokeball on his belt. You're the Meloetta trainer. I'm Ash. I know who you are. Everyone on this island knows who you are. She set down the instrument. I'm Lyra Crescendo. And I need you to understand something. Okay. I'm a trained musician. I've studied acoustic theory, harmonic resonance, and the physiological effects of sound on living organisms since I was 6 years old. I know more about what your Meloetta's song does than anyone else on this archipelago, possibly more than anyone alive. She stood. She was tall, nearly his height, and she radiated a controlled intensity that reminded him of a drawn bow. And I am telling you, you are walking around this island like an emotional supernova, and every woman in range is getting burned. Ash opened his mouth. I'm not finished. She stepped closer. The aria of resonance operates on a frequency that targets the limbic system, the emotional center of the brain. It doesn't distinguish between platonic and romantic attachment. It amplifies all genuine emotional connections, but the romantic ones are the most visible because they're the ones people suppress most aggressively. Your Meloetta's passive humming is creating a field of emotional disinhibition with you at the center, and because you apparently have the emotional resonance of a small sun, the field is enormous. She was breathing slightly harder now. Her hands were clenched at her sides. I walked into Port Cadence yesterday and felt it within 5 minutes. A pull. Toward you. And I don't know you. I've never met you. I have no reason to feel anything toward you whatsoever, and yet here I am, standing on a cliff, explaining acoustic theory to a stranger because my subconscious apparently decided that being near you was more important than the 7 other things I needed to do this morning. Her voice cracked on the last word. She heard it and her jaw tightened with fury, not at him, at herself. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I know what's happening to me. I can identify the exact frequency, the exact mechanism, the precise neurological pathway. And it doesn't matter. Knowing what the fire is doesn't stop it from burning. She turned away, gripping the rock she'd been sitting on, shoulders rigid. I'm fighting it, she said quietly. And I'm losing. And I'm furious. Ash stood very still. The wind came off the ocean, carrying salt and the distant cry of wind gull. He thought about Cadenza's words, truth without armor is the most dangerous force in the world, and understood, for the first time, the full weight of what Meloetta's psalm was doing. Not to his friends. To strangers. To a woman who'd walked into a field of emotional honesty without consenting to it and was now struggling to maintain her sense of self. I'm sorry, he said. He meant it completely. Lyra turned back to him. The fury was still there, but it had shifted, tempered by something she hadn't expected. Genuine remorse. Not defensive, not dismissive. Just sorry. That helps less than you'd think, she said. But it helps more than nothing. She picked up her instrument. I can teach you control techniques. Ways to dampen the area's passive output without silencing your Meloetta entirely. It won't stop the effect, but it'll reduce the radius. Contain it to people who are already closely bonded with you. You do that? I'd do it for my own sanity. She started walking, then paused. Don't mistake this for kindness. I'm doing this because if I spend one more day fighting the urge to come find you, I'm going to break something important. Probably my instrument. Possibly your face. She strode down the path toward town without looking back. The string instrument's case bounced against her hip, and her stride was aggressive and precise and very slightly unsteady, like someone walking a line they could feel tilting. Ash watched her go. Pika, said Pikachu, from his shoulder. Yeah, Ash said. I know. The confrontation with Kale happened that evening. Ash received a message through Nurse Joy, a formal request for a meeting under truce, delivered by a single Silencio operative in a white flag boat. Cynthia advised against it. Misty flat out forbade it. Serena said nothing, which somehow communicated more disapproval than all of Misty's shouting. Ash went anyway. Because understanding your enemy was the first step to beating them, and because something about Kale's voice on that loudspeaker, the calmness, the precision, the absence of malice, told him this wasn't a simple villain. The meeting point was a neutral pier on the island's western coast, away from the harbor. Ash arrived with Pikachu and Lucario out, flanking him. Meloetta stayed in her ball, hidden. Kale was already there. He was older than Ash expected, mid-40s, lean, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him a professorial look. He wore a white coat over dark clothes, and his hands were long-fingered, a musician's hands, Ash realized. Or a former musician's. He stood at the end of the pier with perfect posture, a single Pokémon beside him, a Bronzong, floating silently, its resonance bell faintly glowing. No weapons visible. No operatives. Just a man and his Pokémon. Mr. Ketchum. Thank you for coming. You attacked a town full of civilians. I deployed suppression technology to contain a mythical threat. No casualties. No lethal force. The damage was structural, and I've already arranged to fund repairs. You cornered Meloetta in a forest and tried to silence her permanently. I attempted to neutralize a force that has, historically, destabilized entire civilizations. Kale's voice was measured. Each sentence was built like a bridge, solid, load-bearing, designed to carry weight. May I show you something? He pulled a device from his coat, a small holoprojector. He activated it, and an image appeared in the air between them. A concert hall. Beautiful, vaulted ceilings, acoustic panels, tiered seating for 2,000. The image rotated slowly, showing every angle. The Crescendo Grand Theater, Kale said. 12 years ago. My daughter played her first recital there. Cello. She was 9. She was brilliant. He tapped the projector. The image changed. The same hall, but destroyed, ceiling collapsed, walls blown outward, seats reduced to splinters. Scorch marks. Debris. And in the center, a crater. An explode went into a rage during a visiting trainer's battle in the adjacent stadium. Its boom burst exceeded measured parameters by 300%. The sound wave traveled through the ground and hit the concert hall at the precise moment of peak structural resonance. The building didn't just collapse. It detonated. Another image. A list of names. 43 of them. Casualties, Kale said. Including Mila Vitor. Age 9. The holoprojector went dark. Kale put it away. I lost my hearing in the same event. Both eardrums, shattered. I wear corrective implants now. He tapped behind his ear. I can hear again, more or less. But music sounds, different, through machines. Flattened. Mechanical. I'll never hear the way I once did. He looked at Ash, and his eyes were steady and clear and absolutely devoid of madness. That was the terrifying part. Madness could be dismissed. This was something else, grief compressed into diamond, hardened into ideology, sharpened into action. Sound-based Pokemon are weapons, Mr. Ketchum. Not intentionally. Not maliciously. But a force that can level a building and kill 43 people without meaning to is a weapon by definition. Your Meloetta's song is the most powerful sound-based ability ever documented. The aria of resonance has caused wars. It has destroyed civilizations. She's not a weapon. She's a person. She's a person with the power to strip the free will from every human in range. She doesn't strip free will. She reveals feelings that are already, revealing feelings people have chosen to suppress is stripping free will. The choice to hide what you feel is a fundamental human right. Your Meloetta is violating it on a massive scale, and you're standing at the center of it, amplifying the effect, and calling it love. The words hit like a physical blow. Because they were coherent. Because they made sense. Because a part of Ash, the part that had watched May cry while laughing and Lyra shake with fury at feelings she hadn't consented to, couldn't dismiss them. What do you want? Ash asked. I want the Meloetta. Not to hurt her. To silence her. I have a device, humane, painless, permanent, that neutralizes sound-based abilities at the genetic level. She would be alive, healthy, free to live her life. She simply wouldn't be able to sing. That's not humane. That's mutilation. Is it more humane than allowing her to continue destabilizing everyone around her? Than painting a target on your back that draws paramilitary fleets to civilian towns? Kale stepped closer. Every wielder of power believes they're the exception, Mr. Ketchum. Every one of them is wrong. Silence. The waves. The wind. Kale's bronzong floating soundlessly. I've used the device before, Kale said. 7 times. 7 sound-based Pokemon who were causing uncontrollable harm. I have recordings. He activated the projector again. 7 clips. 7 Pokemon, Exploud, Chatot, Primarina, Noivern, Kricketune, Chimecho, Jigglypuff, each one shown before and after. In the before clips, they sang, cried, resonated. In the after clips, they opened their mouths and produced nothing. The silence where their voices should have been was the most horrible thing Ash had ever heard, precisely because it was nothing at all. The Jigglypuff's mouth moved. No sound came out. It looked confused. Hurt. Lost. Ash's fist clenched at his side. Pikachu's cheeks were sparking, and Lucario's paws glowed with suppressed aura. "You're a monster," Ash said. Kale's expression didn't change. "Perhaps. But I'm a monster who's never lost another concert hall." He deactivated the projector and turned away. Over his shoulder, "I won't ask again, Mr. Ketchum. Next time, I won't ask at all." He walked down the pier. The Bronzong followed, its bell tolling once, a single, low note that hung in the air like a judgment. Ash stood on the pier until the white flag boat disappeared around the headland. His hands were shaking. Not from fear. From the particular kind of anger that comes from confronting an argument you can't entirely defeat with the truth you're carrying. Because Kale was wrong, fundamentally, essentially, in his bones wrong, about the solution. But he wasn't wrong about the problem. The aria was affecting people without their consent. Meloetta's song was dangerous. And Ash was at the center of it, amplifying everything, and he hadn't figured out what to do about that yet. He needed to figure it out fast. Because somewhere beneath his feet, beneath the pier, beneath the ocean, beneath the islands themselves, something old and terrible was listening to the argument and smiling. Lyra found him the next morning. She'd set up a workspace in the old lighthouse on the island's eastern point, a tall, abandoned structure that the local government had apparently given her access to years ago for her acoustic research. Inside, it was a chaos of instruments, recording equipment, frequency analyzers, and research notes pinned to every flat surface. "Sit," she said, pointing at a stool. Ash sat. Meloetta was out of her ball, floating curiously among the instruments, occasionally touching one and producing a note that made the frequency analyzer spike. "First lesson," Lyra said. "Your Meloetta's passive hum operates at approximately 432 Hz, the natural frequency of emotional resonance in most mammals. By herself, her effective range is maybe 50 meters. With you amplifying her, it's closer to 500. She pulled up a chart on her laptop. "This is the emotional activity map of Port Cadence since you arrived." The chart showed a heat map of the town. At its center, a blazing white-hot point, the Pokémon Center where Ash was staying. Radiating outward from that point, concentric rings of diminishing intensity, color-coded from red to blue. The red zone, highest emotional amplitude, covered the entire harbor district. Every person in that red zone has experienced measurably elevated emotional responses since your arrival. Heart rate variability, cortisol fluctuations, serotonin spikes, all consistent with the removal of emotional suppression mechanisms. Lyra tapped the screen. In men, it manifests as increased confidence, camaraderie, and competitive drive. In women who have pre-existing emotional connections to you, it manifests as, I know what it manifests as. Romantic disinhibition, she finished flatly. And in women with no pre-existing connection, like me, it manifests as an inexplicable gravitational pull that I am dealing with through rigorous self-analysis and frankly unhealthy amounts of coffee. She poured herself another cup to prove it. The control technique is conceptual, not mechanical. She set down the cup and picked up her instrument, the same string thing she'd been playing on the cliff. Meloetta's aria resonates with your emotional output. The more openly you feel, the stronger the amplification. If you can learn to modulate your emotional state, not suppress it, that would sever the bond, but focus it, channel it directionally rather than broadcasting omnidirectionally, you can reduce the passive radius. How do I do that? Think of your emotions as sound. Right now, you're a speaker pointed at the ceiling, broadcasting everywhere, reflecting off every surface. I need you to become a directional microphone. Same volume, same intensity, but aimed. She played a note on her instrument. Listen to this. It's the same frequency as Meloetta's hum, produced mechanically. Feel it? He could. A vibration in his chest, fainter than Meloetta's but similar. Now focus on where you feel it. Not your ears, your chest. Your heart. That's where the resonance originates in you. I want you to imagine that feeling narrowing. Not shrinking, narrowing. Like a spotlight instead of a floodlight. Ash closed his eyes. It took him a moment to find the sensation, the warm, humming core that had been part of him since Meloetta touched his cheek in the forest. He focused on it. Tried to shape it. It resisted at first, wanting to spread, wanting to reach out and connect with everything around it, because that was its nature and his nature and the reason it was so powerful. But he'd spent years training Pokémon to control forces that wanted to be wild. This wasn't different. Just, internal. He breathed. He focused. He narrowed. Lyra's instruments flickered. The heat map shifted, the red zone contracting, pulling inward, the radius shrinking from 500 meters to 300, then 200. That's it, Lyra said, and there was something in her voice, surprise, relief, and underneath it, a note of loss, because the pull she'd been fighting was easing and part of her didn't want it to ease. Hold that. Practice it. The more you train this, the more control you'll have. Meloetta was watching him with an expression of deep approval. She sang a supportive trill and settled on his shoulder, adding her own energy to the focusing exercise. Thank you, Ash said to Lyra. She busied herself with her instruments, not looking at him. Don't thank me. This is self-preservation. Still. She glanced at him. The amber eyes were guarded but warm underneath, the way a fireplace looks through frosted glass. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? An idiot who got lucky with a mythical Pokémon. And? You're an idiot who got lucky with a mythical Pokémon and also happens to have the purest emotional frequency I've ever measured. She shook her head. It's annoying. She turned back to her work, and Ash left the lighthouse with Meloetta on his shoulder and Pikachu on the other, and the radius of his emotional broadcast was 200 meters and shrinking. It wasn't a solution. But it was a step. That evening, he climbed to the highest point on the island. It was a ridge above the tree-line, bare rock and wind, the entire archipelago spread below in a tapestry of green and blue. The sun was setting again, every day on Crescendo Island ended like a painting, and Ash sat with his legs dangling over the edge and let Meloetta out of her ball. She settled beside him. For a while, they just sat together in the wind. Mel, he said. I need to understand something. The girls, my friends, the things they're feeling. Is it real? She looked at him. Then she held out her hand. He took it. The song she sang was unlike any she'd sung before. Not an aria. Not a melody. Something deeper, a transmission, direct and unfiltered, bypassing his ears and entering his awareness like a memory being implanted. He felt it. Not his own feelings. Theirs. Misty first. The sensation crashed into him like a wave, fierce, turbulent, decades old, a love that had been born in a river and tempered by 1,000 arguments and 100 goodbyes and one desperate, unspoken wish that he'd come back, please come back, just once come back for me. It was oceanic. It was terrifying. It was absolutely, unquestionably real. Dawn next. Bright and warm and effervescent, a feeling like sunrise, like the first day of a journey, like standing on a stage and knowing you're about to be brilliant. She loved the adventure of him, the chaos, the energy, the way he made the world feel bigger and more possible. It was joy given a direction. It was a compass pointing at his heart. May. Warm like bread, like hot fire, like arms around you when you're cold. She loved the dailiness of him, the meals shared, the small kindnesses, the way he'd hand her a berry without being asked and fight a legendary without being asked and never see the difference between the two. Hers was a love of proximity, of presence, of being there. It was home. Serena. Clear. Still. Deep. A pool of absolutely transparent water that went down farther than he could see. She'd loved him since before she knew what love was, and the feeling hadn't wavered or complicated itself, it had simply grown, deepening every year like a tree extending its roots, until it was part of her architecture. She didn't love him despite the distance and the silence and the years. She loved him including them. All of it was the love. And underneath all four, a single truth that hit Ash like Pikachu's thunderbolt aimed directly at his stupid, oblivious heart: these feelings existed before the aria. Every single one. Meloetta's song didn't create them. It just made it impossible for anyone, including him, to look away. Ash came out of the transmission gasping. His eyes were wet. The sunset blurred. They already felt this. All of them. Meloetta nodded. Her own eyes were shining. For how long? She held up her hands and spread them wide. Years. Ash pressed his palms against his face. The magnitude of it, the sheer accumulated weight of feeling that had been directed at him, unnoticed, unacknowledged, year after year after year, was staggering. He'd been so busy looking forward, running toward the next challenge, the next badge, the next horizon, that he'd never once turned around to see what was standing behind him, waiting. "I'm an idiot," he said. Meloetta patted his head sympathetically. "The biggest idiot in 6 regions." She didn't disagree. He sat on the ridge and watched the sun go down and felt, for the first time in his life, the full weight of being loved. Not the abstract concept. The specific, individual, devastatingly real experience of knowing that 4 people had seen exactly who he was: reckless, dense, kind, relentless, emotionally illiterate, heroically stubborn, and had chosen to love him anyway. It was the most wonderful and most overwhelming thing he'd ever felt, and he had no idea what to do with it, and Meloetta sat beside him humming softly, and the stars came out over the crescendo archipelago one by one like notes in an ascending scale. He came back down the ridge in darkness, resolved. Not resolved about the girls, that was going to take a lot more time and a lot more emotional processing than he'd ever done in his life. But resolved about Meloetta, and Kale, and the threat beneath the islands. The threat made itself known before he reached the bottom. He felt it first, a vibration in the rock beneath his feet, too rhythmic to be geological, too deep to be mechanical. A pulse. Like a heartbeat, but wrong, a heartbeat with the intervals slightly off, creating a dissonance that made his teeth ache and his skin crawl. Meloetta felt it too. She stiffened on his shoulder, her hum cutting off, replaced by a low, frightened keening. The pulse came again. Stronger. The rocks vibrated. Pebbles danced. Somewhere below, something was waking up, and its waking was the opposite of music. Ash's communicator buzzed. Lyra's voice, tight with urgency: "Ash. Get to the lighthouse. Now." He ran. The lighthouse was lit up, every instrument Lyra had was active, screens flashing, frequency analyzers spiking. She was standing in the center of the chaos, staring at a seismograph that was drawing patterns that looked less like earth tremors and more like a waveform. "Look at this," she said without preamble. She pointed at the screen. "These vibrations have been building since the harbor attack. Since Kale's dampening field silenced Meloetta, even temporarily. Cadenza mentioned something. A seal. Something called cacophon." Lyra's face was pale. "I found this yesterday." She pulled up a photograph on her laptop, a mural painted on the wall of a sea cave on the island's southern coast. The image showed 2 figures facing each other across a swirling void. On the left, unmistakably, Meloetta, singing, glowing, surrounded by threads of connection that linked to dozens of smaller figures. On the right, a dark mirror image, same shape, same size, but distorted, its mouth open in a silent scream, surrounded by severed threads and isolated figures. Between them, a stylized seal. Cracks running through it. "The mural is 4 centuries old," Lyra said. "According to the inscriptions, which took me 6 hours to translate, you're welcome, Meloetta's song maintains a harmonic seal over an entity called cacophon. The anti-Meloetta. Where Meloetta's song creates connection, cacophon creates isolation. Where she reveals truth, it broadcasts lies. Where she strengthens bonds, it severs them. And the seal is cracking. The seal has been degrading for centuries because no Meloetta has sung on these islands since the last one left. Your Meloetta's arrival actually stabilized it. I measured the harmonic patterns improving over the past 3 days. But when Kale's dampening field hit, she pulled up another graph. The seal destabilized by 40% in the 18 minutes the field was active. That crack hasn't healed. The vibrations we're feeling are cacophon testing the weakened points. Ash looked at Meloetta. She was trembling, staring at the mural image on Lyra's screen, her ancient eyes wide with recognition and dread. She'd known. Not the details, not the name, but she'd felt it, the reason she was drawn to these islands, the reason her song was so powerful here, the reason everything felt more vivid and more dangerous. Your Meloetta isn't just singing love songs, Lyra said quietly. She's holding something down. And the man who wants to silence her is weakening the lock every time he deploys that dampening field. The vibration pulsed again. The lighthouse shuddered. Lyra's instruments screamed. Somewhere beneath the crescendo archipelago, in a darkness that had existed since before music was born, something that was the opposite of song pressed against its cage and found it, thinner. We need to tell the others, Ash said. All of them. Cynthia, the council, Damien, everyone. Kale. Especially Kale. Ash's jaw set. He thinks he's protecting the world from sound Pokemon. He needs to know he's about to destroy it. They ran. Behind them, in the empty lighthouse, Lyra's seismograph continued to draw its patterns. They were getting larger. More regular. More like breathing. And at the bottom of the deepest trench beneath the archipelago, in a prison of harmonic crystal that had held for 400 years, the thing called cacophon opened an eye that was the absence of light and listened to the silence where music should have been. It smiled with no mouth. And the cracks spread. They gathered in the Pokemon Center's conference room at midnight, all of them. Ash, his friends, Cynthia, Damien, Lyra, Officer Riff, even old Cadenza, leaning on her bell staff in the corner. Ash laid it out. Everything. Meloetta's aria, the seal, cacophon, Kale's dampening field. He didn't soften it or spin it. Just truth, delivered the way he delivered battle commands, clear, direct, with absolute conviction. When he finished, the room was silent. Damien spoke first. You're telling me that the paramilitary lunatic trying to silence your Meloetta is actively weakening the seal on a catastrophic entity that feeds on emotional discord? Yes. And the only thing maintaining that seal is the song he's trying to destroy? Yes. Damien leaned back and closed his eyes. This island can never just have normal problems. Cynthia was already on her communicator, rapid-firing instructions to League contacts. Misty and Dawn were conferring in sharp whispers, already strategizing defensive positions. May was pulling up maps of the archipelago on her phone, marking the locations of the Sea Cave mural and Lyra's lighthouse. Serena had produced a notepad from somewhere and was creating an organizational chart of assets and responsibilities with the terrifying efficiency of someone who'd been running complex operations since she was 15. They were already a team. Already functioning. Already moving toward the problem instead of away from it. Ash watched them and felt, in his chest, the directional beam of warmth he'd been practicing, not a floodlight, but a spotlight. Aimed at all of them. Warming all of them. Holding all of them together in a circle of resonance that Meloetta's song turned into strength. Then his communicator buzzed. An unknown frequency. He answered. Kale's voice. Calm as ever. But underneath the calm, something new, impatience. Mr. Ketchum. I've been patient. I've been reasonable. I've offered you choices and explanations and the courtesy of a dialogue. You've chosen to ignore all of them. So I'm done offering. The dampening array deploys at dawn. Full power. Archipelago-wide. Every sound-based Pokemon on these islands will be silenced. Your Meloetta will be silenced. And this will end. The line went dead. Ash looked at the room. Every face looked back at him. Meloetta pressed against his chest, trembling, voiceless with fear. He put on his hat. Then we stop him before dawn. No one argued. No one hesitated. Pikachu's cheeks sparked. They moved. Outside, the ocean was dark and still, and the vibrations from below were growing stronger, and the seal was cracking, and dawn was 6 hours away. Chapter 3, The Final Aria, Core Conflict Type, Large-Scale Threat plus Emotional Resolution plus Climactic Battle plus Romance Resolution. Word target, 10,000 plus Movement, Crisis unfolds, Cacophon begins to manifest. The entity doesn't have a body at first, it's an anti-sound, a spreading silence that devours harmony. Where it passes, people become isolated, paranoid, hostile. Relationships fracture. Pokemon turn on trainers. The fabric of emotional connection unravels. The crescendo archipelago descends into chaos. Kale's reckoning. Kale watches in horror as his dampening field doesn't just silence Meloetta, it cracks the ancient seal entirely. He realizes his crusade against sound Pokemon has unleashed exactly the kind of catastrophe he was trying to prevent. His crew begins turning on each other under Cacophon's influence. He's forced to confront the truth, his grief made him the monster. Ash, rather than condemning him, offers a hand. Help me fix this or get out of my way. Kale, breaking, chooses to help. The plan, old Cadenza and Lyra explain, the only way to reseal Cacophon is the complete aria of resonance sung at full power. But Meloetta is silenced, her voice crushed by Kale's device. To restore it, she needs an emotional anchor, someone whose heart resonance is strong enough to reignite her song through sheer connection. Ash is that anchor. But there's a cost, channeling the full aria will permanently amplify his emotional bonds. The girls who feel connected to him will feel it forever. Not as compulsion, as an open channel. They'll always know what he feels, and he'll always know what they feel. The girl's choice, Ash tries to find another way, unwilling to permanently affect his friends without consent. Each girl, independently, comes to him. Not because of the song, Meloetta isn't singing. The dampening field is active. These are their real feelings, undistorted. Each one tells him, in her own way, that the song didn't create anything new. It just gave them permission. They choose this. Every one of them. This is the emotional proof that the feelings are genuine. Damien's alliance. Damien returns as Cacophon's influence spreads. His Pokemon are struggling against the discord. He finds Ash preparing for the final battle and, grudgingly, offers his strength. I still think you're reckless. But that thing needs to die more than I need to be right. Ash grins. Rivals become allies. The battle, multi-stage, Stage 1, Assault on Kale's dampening array. Ash, Damien, and the girls fight through Cacophon-corrupted Pokemon and malfunctioning Silencio tech to reach the central emitter. Kale guides them from inside, sabotaging his own systems. The dampening field falls. Stage 2, Cacophon fully manifests, a towering entity of distorted sound and visual static, like reality being untuned. It attacks with waves of discord that turn allies against each other. Ash's Pokemon hold the line. Pikachu has a defining moment, standing in the epicenter of a discord wave and refusing to turn, his bond with Ash too strong to break. Thunderbolt lights up the dark. Stage 3, Meloetta, freed from the dampening field but still weakened, tries to sing. Her voice cracks. She can't sustain the aria alone. Ash reaches for her, physically holds her, and pours everything he has into the bond. Not aura, not magic. Just feeling. Every genuine connection he's ever made. The girls add their voices, not literally singing, but their emotional resonance channeling through the bond Meloetta created. Lyra, the musician, actually does sing, harmonizing with Meloetta. The aria builds. The final aria, Meloetta sings the complete aria of resonance for the first time in millennia. It's the most beautiful and terrifying thing anyone has ever heard. It sweeps across the archipelago. People who were fighting stop. Pokemon who were corrupted go still. Cacophon screams in anti-sound and is driven back, compressed, sealed by the cascading waves of pure emotional resonance. The seal reforms, stronger than before, reinforced by the bonds Ash has forged. Aftermath, the dampening field is destroyed. Sound returns fully. The islands begin to heal. Kale surrenders himself to the League. But before he goes, Ash tells him his daughter would have wanted him to protect music, not destroy it. Kale breaks down. First genuine emotion he's shown in years. Damien clasps Ash's hand. Next time, I'm winning. You can try. They part as true rivals. The tournament resumes, because of course it does. Life goes on. Romance resolution, Ash doesn't pick one girl in a neat ending. Instead, he has honest conversations with each of them for the first time in his life. He's not oblivious anymore, the aria burned that out of him. He acknowledges feelings he's been running from. The strongest thread is with Serena, their conversation is the longest, the most intimate, the one where he actually says, I think I've known for a while, but the story honors every connection. The bonds are real. The channel is open. What happens next is living, not a fairy tale ending. Final scene, Ash walks toward the tournament stadium. Pikachu on his shoulder. Meloetta floating beside him, humming softly. His friends around him, all of them, girls and rivals and allies. The sun hits the ocean. Meloetta's song carries on the wind, and somewhere deep beneath the islands, the seal holds strong. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.